My name is Peyton, 33 years old, and right after our divorce, hearing my mother-in-law stopped me at the courthouse doors. She threw my designer bag onto the concrete and screamed that I was never to set foot in her son's house again. "Get out!" she yelled, her face red with rage. I did not cry. I simply adjusted my coat and smiled. Actually, I already sold that house to a commercial developer this morning. And as a bonus, I just fired your son from his own company. Before I continue this story, let me know where you are watching from in the comments below. Hit like and subscribe if you have ever had to outsmart a toxic family that thought you were nothing but a stepping stone. The absolute destruction of my marriage began exactly 10 days before that courthouse confrontation. It was the 7th anniversary gala for my husband Donovan's tech startup. We were hosting the event at a luxury hotel downtown, a venue that cost more for one night than most people make in a year. Donovan loved to play the role of the self-made genius CEO. He walked around the ballroom in a tailored velvet jacket, shaking hands with investors and soaking up the admiration. What none of those investors knew was that I was the unseen architect behind his entire business model. As an M&A strategist for a private venture capital firm, I had spent years secretly fixing his catastrophic financial mistakes and keeping his company afloat. I let him have the spotlight because I believed we were building our future together. I was making my way to the VIP family table near the front of the stage when Catherine, my mother-in-law, suddenly stepped into my path. She was wearing a heavily beaded gown paid for by my salary, though she would never admit it. She grabbed the gold-lettered place card with my name on it and shoved it into my hand. "You cannot sit here tonight, Peyton," she said, her voice dripping with condescension. "Donovan needs to look like a visionary founder to these venture capitalists. Wives are just accessories, and frankly, your corporate suit ruins the aesthetic we are going for. Go sit at the back table with the interns and the consultants." I looked at the table she was pointing to, tucked away in a dark corner near the kitchen doors. For 7 years, I had tolerated Catherine's elitist delusions and her constant need to remind me that I was not born into their kind of imaginary high society. I could have caused a scene. I could have reminded her that I personally negotiated the venue discount. But fighting with a woman whose greatest achievement was marrying rich and losing it all felt like a waste of my energy. I took my place card, gave her a polite nod, and walked to the back of the room. Let them have their fragile egos. I preferred observing from the shadows anyway. I took a seat next to a group of nervous junior marketing staff. The lights dimmed as Donovan took the stage to give his keynote speech. Halfway through his monologue about transparency and corporate integrity, my phone buzzed in my purse. It was an automated fraud alert from our joint premium credit card. A charge had just been approved for $50,000 at an exclusive downtown jeweler. My heart beat a little faster, but my face remained perfectly blank. Donovan and I had agreed to freeze unnecessary spending this quarter because his startup was burning through cash. I looked away from the stage and scanned the dimly lit ballroom. Standing near the VIP tables was Brianna Donovan's 26-year-old executive assistant. She was clapping enthusiastically for her boss. Around her neck rested a brand-new, blindingly obvious diamond choker that had definitely not been there when she arrived at the gala. It caught the stage lights sparkling like a massive neon sign pointing directly to my husband's betrayal. The puzzle pieces snapped into place immediately. The late nights at the office, the sudden, unexplained business trips, the defensive attitude whenever I asked to look at the company ledgers. He was not just cheating on me. He was funding his affair with the money I had helped him secure. When the speech ended and the applause faded into music, I watched Donovan step off the stage. Brianna quickly separated from the crowd and slipped down a restricted hallway leading to the hotel's executive offices. Donovan followed her a few minutes later, pausing to check over his shoulder before disappearing through the heavy oak doors. I stood up from the intern table, my mind completely clear. I did not feel the urge to scream or cry. In my line of work, emotion is a liability. Data is power. I followed them down the quiet corridor. The door to the executive suite was slightly ajar. I stood in the dark hallway and pulled out my phone, opening the camera app. Through the crack in the door, I had a clear view of Donovan pressing Brianna against the mahogany desk, kissing her deeply, while his hands tangled in the expensive diamond necklace he had just bought her with my money. I hit record. I held my breath and kept my hand perfectly steady. After a moment, Donovan pulled away. He told Brianna he needed to put the jewelry box and receipt away before I saw them. I watched closely as he walked over to the wall safe. He tapped a 4-digit sequence into the keypad. The green light flashed and the safe clicked open. I committed the numbers to memory instantly. Suddenly, Donovan's phone chimed loudly in the quiet room. He pulled it from his pocket and frowned. "It is a security notification," he told Brianna, his voice laced with panic. "Peyton's phone is connected to the same local network as this office. She might be looking for me." Brianna gasped and stepped away from the desk. Donovan quickly opened his banking application. "I am going to lock all her credit cards right now," he said. "If she tries to buy a drink or get a cab, they will decline. It will keep her busy and embarrassed at the bar while we get back to the party." He actually smiled, thinking he was a genius for cutting off my financial access. He thought he was trapping me. He thought he was the smartest person in the building. I stopped recording, slipped my phone back into my pocket, and stepped away from the door. I walked silently back down the corridor, the heavy bass of the ballroom music growing louder with every step. My credit cards might be locked, but Donovan was painfully ignorant of how real wealth operated. I did not need a piece of plastic to destroy him. I stepped out the side exit of the hotel into the cool night air. The city lights reflected off the wet pavement. I dialed a highly encrypted number that went directly to the senior partners at the venture capital firm I controlled. When the line connected, I did not bother with pleasantries. I spoke 6 simple words: execute the hostile debt buyout. I hung up the phone and looked back at the glowing hotel windows. Donovan thought he had just secured his future with his mistress, but he had no idea he had just handed me the keys to his entire empire. The sun had barely risen over the hills the next morning when the heavy oak doors of the mansion rattled under a violent, sustained pounding. I was already awake, sitting at the kitchen island with a cup of black coffee, reviewing the initial acquisition documents my legal team had expedited overnight. I calmly locked my tablet, stood up, and walked to the foyer. When I pulled the door open, Catherine pushed past me without a single word, followed closely by my sister-in-law, Isabella, and 2 burly men wearing private security uniforms. Isabella marched straight toward the master suite, grabbed the heavy-duty black trash bags from the car. She ordered one of the security guards. "We are clearing out the squatter today." I leaned against the doorframe, watching the ridiculous circus unfold with complete detachment. Catherine turned to me with a triumphant sneer, her eyes gleaming with malicious joy. "Donovan called me at dawn. He is filing for divorce, Peyton. You pushed him way too far last night with your corporate ice queen routine. Since my brilliant son was smart enough to keep only his name on the deed to this beautiful house, you have exactly 30 minutes to collect your cheap business suits and get off my property before I have these gentlemen arrest you for trespassing." I watched Isabella emerge from my walk-in closet, gleefully shoving my silk blouses and tailored blazers into a plastic garbage bag. "Look at her, Mom," Isabella laughed, tossing a pair of my favorite heels carelessly onto the hardwood floor. "She is practically catatonic. She finally realizes she is absolutely nothing without Donovan's money and our family name." I did not shed a single tear. I did not yell panic or threaten them with my lawyers. I knew something they were entirely ignorant of. This $3 million mansion they were so proud to claim was heavily leveraged against Donovan's sinking corporate debt. And since my firm executed the hostile buyout at midnight, I was now the primary lien holder. Catherine was currently throwing me out of a house that I technically owned. But exposing that reality right now would ruin the trap I was carefully setting. I needed them to feel victorious, so they would let their guard down. I walked past them without a word, grabbed a single leather weekender bag, and packed my laptop, my encrypted files, and a few basic essentials. "Keep the clothes, Isabella," I said evenly. "You have always been desperate to try on my life anyway." Her face flushed a deep, angry red, But before she could scream a response, the sound of tires screeching in the driveway interrupted us. A sleek silver sedan parked abruptly behind the security vehicles. Out stepped Andre Isabella's husband. Andre was a brilliant senior auditor at a top accounting firm. He was also a man of unshakable integrity, which made his marriage to the shallow, entitled Isabella completely baffling to me. He took one look at the trash bags strewn across the pristine lawn and the security guards standing on the porch, and his face hardened with absolute disgust. "What on earth is going on here?" Andre demanded, his deep voice cutting through the crisp morning air. He strode up the walkway, his gaze shifting from his furious wife to his smug mother-in-law. Isabella rolled her eyes and crossed her arms. "We are taking out the trash, Andre. Donovan is divorcing her, so Mom and I are making sure she does not steal any of his valuables on her way out." "This is an illegal eviction, Isabella," Andre snapped, stepping firmly between her and my belongings. "You cannot just hire private muscle to throw someone out of their primary residence without a court order. This is barbaric, and it is a crime." Catherine scoffed, waving her hand dismissively at him. "Oh, please. You are just an accountant, Andre. Leave the real family business to us. Donovan wants her gone, so she is leaving. Do not make this about your rigid moral compass." Andre ignored her completely. He bent down, picked up my heavy weekender bag and the 2 boxes I had packed, and turned to me. "Let me help you to your car, Peyton. I am so deeply sorry about them." I followed him down the long driveway to my vehicle. Once we were safely out of earshot from the shrieking women on the porch, Andre popped my trunk and placed the bags inside. He did not step away immediately. Instead, he looked over his shoulder to ensure Catherine and Isabella were distracted by the security guards, then leaned in close to me. "Peyton, listen to me carefully," he whispered, his tone urgent and deadly serious. "I was forced to look at Donovan's corporate financials last week. Isabella demanded I help him prepare for an upcoming audit to keep the board happy. Donovan is not a genius. He is completely broke. He is drowning in millions of dollars of undocumented debt, and he is cooking the books to hide it from his investors." I looked at Andre, allowing a slow, calculated smile to finally touch my lips. "I appreciate the warning, Andre, but I already know his company is a house of cards. I just need the hard forensic proof to tear it down legally." Andre stared at me for a long second, realizing I was playing a game far above Donovan's level of comprehension. "I can get you the proof," he said firmly. "I have a digital backup of the real ledgers. I absolutely refused to sign off on them, but I kept the files because I knew Donovan would try to frame someone else when his scheme eventually collapsed." "You realize helping me will destroy your brother-in-law," I warned him quietly. "Isabella will likely divorce you, and Catherine will make your life a living hell in every social circle she controls." Andre let out a harsh, bitter laugh. My marriage was over the day I realized Isabella was secretly draining my personal savings to fund her mother's country club lifestyle. I am tired of compromising my ethics for a family that looks down on me because of my background. I am in. We will meet later today at a secure location to hand over the flash drive. He closed the trunk with a solid thud, gave me a respectful nod, and walked back up the driveway to handle his furious wife. I slid into the driver's seat of my car, feeling the pure rush of adrenaline. I had the massive financial leverage, and now I had the inside forensic evidence. Donovan's entire world was about to cave in on him. I reached to turn the ignition, but my phone suddenly erupted. A barrage of text messages, missed calls, and social media notifications flooded my screen in rapid succession. I opened the first alert, a link sent by one of my junior colleagues with a string of question marks. It was a video posted just 10 minutes ago by Brianna, Donovan's mistress. The video was highly edited and professionally lit. Brianna sat on a couch, tears streaming down her perfect face, speaking directly to the camera. She claimed she was a whistleblower coming forward to protect the company and her boss. With fake, trembling sobs, she wove a completely fabricated narrative, accusing me of carrying on a massive affair with a rival venture capital executive. She framed Donovan as the tragically heartbroken, hardworking husband who had just discovered his cruel, cheating wife was trying to ruin his startup out of pure spite. I watched the view count on the video skyrocket in real time. It was already going viral across our entire professional tech network. People were leaving vicious comments calling for me to be blacklisted from the industry. Donovan and Brianna were trying to destroy my professional reputation before I could destroy their bank accounts. I tossed my phone onto the passenger seat and shifted the car into drive. Let them play their pathetic public relations games. I was going to war. I kept my eyes on the road as my phone practically vibrated off the passenger seat. The video Brianna posted was spreading through our local tech community like a wildfire. By the time I pulled into a coffee shop parking lot to review the damage, my professional inbox was already flooded with venomous emails. Colleagues I had known for years were sending me disgusted messages. Industry message boards were lighting up with posts calling me a manipulative gold digger who tried to ruin a brilliant founder. Brianna had played her part perfectly in the video, sobbing to the camera about how she caught me transferring company funds to a phantom lover. It was a masterclass in projection, completely fabricated to destroy my reputation before I could reveal Donovan was the one actually bleeding his startup dry. But a viral video is just digital noise. It has no legal standing in a courtroom, and it certainly holds no weight in a corporate acquisition. My phone rang with a demanding tone. It was Donovan. I let it ring twice before answering, keeping my voice small and unsteady. He demanded I come to his executive office immediately to sort out this mess. I agreed, letting a perfectly timed sob slip through my lips before hanging up. An hour later, I walked through the glass doors of his startup headquarters. The junior employees stared at me, whispering behind their monitors. I kept my head down, playing the part of the defeated, humiliated wife. When I entered Donovan's corner office, he was sitting behind his massive oak desk, looking incredibly pleased with himself. Standing right beside him was Catherine, holding a crystal glass of sparkling water. She looked like a predator cornering a wounded animal. Donovan sighed heavily, putting on his best benevolent victim face. "Look at the disaster you have caused, Peyton," he said, gesturing to his computer screen. "The board is furious. Investors are calling me non-stop about this cheating scandal. You have jeopardized the entire future of this company with your reckless behavior." I stood in front of his desk, forcing my shoulders to slump. Catherine let out a sharp laugh. "We always knew you were trash," she sneered. "You thought you could ride my son's coattails to the top, but you are nothing without the name he gave you. Now everyone in the industry knows exactly what kind of woman you are." Donovan held up a hand to silence his mother, playing the gracious mediator. "I am a reasonable man, Peyton," he said smoothly. "I do not want a messy, drawn-out public divorce. It is bad for the company stock, and frankly, I just want you out of my life quickly." He slid a piece of paper and a folded check across the polished wood of his desk. I looked down at the check. It was written for exactly $10,000. The paper next to it was a standard no-fault zero-asset divorce waiver. It explicitly stated that I would relinquish any and all claims to Donovan's current assets, his company shares, and the marital home in exchange for a clean break and the $10,000 payout. "It is a generous offer considering what you have done," Donovan said confidently. "Sign the waiver, take the cash, and quietly disappear. If you fight me on this, I will use my legal team to bury you in court, and you will walk away with absolutely nothing but the clothes on your back." I reached out with a trembling hand, lightly touching the pen he offered. I let a few tears spill over my eyelashes, biting my lower lip to make it look like I was struggling to maintain my composure. "You are really leaving me with nothing," I whispered, letting my voice crack perfectly on the last syllable. Catherine walked over to a silver ice bucket resting on a side table and pulled out a bottle of vintage champagne. "Sign the paper, Peyton," she demanded happily. "We have celebrating to do." With shaking fingers, I picked up the heavy silver pen and signed my name on the dotted line. I initialed every page, legally severing my right to any of his current holdings. Donovan snatched the documents back the second my pen lifted from the paper. He grinned broadly, inspecting my signature before nodding at his mother. Catherine popped the champagne cork, the loud crack echoing in the office. They did not even wait for me to leave the room before they started pouring drinks to celebrate my financial ruin. I picked up the $10,000 check, turned my back on them, and walked out of the office. The moment the heavy glass door clicked shut behind me, My trembling stopped completely. I reached up, wiped the fake tears from my cheeks, and walked briskly through the lobby with my head held high. I stepped out of the corporate building and walked straight toward a tinted black SUV idling at the curb. The back door opened and I slid into the leather seat next to the lead attorney for my venture capital firm. I handed him the $10,000 check and a picture I took of the signed waiver. "Did he sign it?" the attorney asked, reviewing the digital image on my phone. "He signed it and kept the original," I replied, a genuine smile finally breaking across my face. By forcing me to sign that zero-asset waiver, Donovan thought he was protecting his millions. He had absolutely no idea that his company was secretly holding $8 million in toxic fraudulent debt, a debt bomb that my firm had just officially purchased and taken control of. By legally relinquishing my rights to his marital and corporate assets, I had just completely shielded myself from the devastating financial crater he was about to fall into. Donovan did not just cut me out of his life. He legally trapped himself in a cage of his own making, and I was about to drop the match. I handed the $10,000 check to my lead attorney and watched him slide it into a thick manila folder. I told the driver to drop me off at a small, independent coffee shop on the industrial edge of the city. It was the kind of place that did not have security cameras or a corporate wireless network to track digital footprints. I walked inside, ordered a black tea, and sat in a dim booth near the back exit. In this game of corporate warfare, privacy was my most valuable asset. 10 minutes later, Andre walked through the door. At 32 years old, my African-American brother-in-law was widely recognized as one of the sharpest senior auditors in the state. He carried himself with a quiet, imposing dignity that completely contrasted with the loud, performative arrogance of his wife, Isabella. He spotted me in the corner, purchased a coffee, and slid into the booth across from me. He did not waste time with pleasantries or small talk. Andre placed a small, heavily encrypted black flash drive on the wooden table between us. I stared at it for a moment. That little piece of plastic held the power to completely dismantle a multi-million-dollar illusion. Andre leaned forward, his voice a low, controlled rumble over the ambient noise of the coffee shop. "I spent the last 48 hours tearing apart Donovan's private ledgers," he said. "I knew his startup was bleeding cash, but I thought it was just terrible business management and a bloated ego." "I was wrong, Peyton. It is not mismanagement. It is textbook premeditated embezzlement." I picked up the flash drive, feeling the heavy weight of its contents. "How much?" I asked, keeping my voice perfectly level. Andre shook his head in absolute disgust. $2.5 million of investor funds completely drained over the last 18 months. He created a sophisticated web of phantom vendor accounts to funnel the money out of the corporate accounts and directly into his personal pockets. I ran the trace on where the stolen money actually went. It is sickening. Andre listed the expenses, his face hardening with every single word. Donovan bought Brianna a luxury penthouse apartment downtown, using a shell corporation to hide the paper trail. He paid for Catherine's exorbitant country club initiation fees and covered her massive monthly dues so she could pretend she was high society. And Isabella. Andre stopped, his jaw clenching so tight I could see the muscle ticking in his cheek. He funded Isabella's endless designer shopping sprees. My own wife has been acting like a billionaire socialite using stolen corporate funds. I cannot even look at her right now. I refuse to be complicit in a felony just because I married into this deeply corrupted family. I looked at Andre with profound, genuine respect. He was the only person in Donovan's toxic orbit who possessed an actual moral compass. He was risking his career and his marriage to do the right thing. "Thank you, Andre," I said softly. "I know exactly what it cost you to cross your wife and her family. I will make sure you are legally shielded from the financial fallout." Andre gave a grim, resolute nod, stood up from the booth, and walked out the back door without another word. I left the coffee shop and headed straight to the downtown financial district. My legal team had arranged a highly classified meeting with the senior executives of the primary commercial bank holding Donovan's corporate loans. When I walked into their high-rise boardroom, the bankers looked visibly confused. They thought they were meeting a powerful representative from an anonymous venture capital firm, not the recently discarded wife of one of their tech clients. I did not give them a single second to question my presence. I plugged Andre's flash drive into their presentation system and displayed the raw, undeniable forensic proof of Donovan's $2.5 million embezzlement on the massive screen. The bankers went completely pale. They realized instantly that the $8 million they had loaned Donovan's startup was backed by fabricated revenue and fraudulent numbers. If this information went public, their bank would face a massive regulatory scandal and a total financial loss. That is when I made my aggressive move. I represent the shadow venture capital firm that currently holds 51% of your voting power. I told them smoothly, watching the panic set in. I am offering to buy Donovan's entire $8 million debt portfolio from you right now, but I am only paying 20 cents on the dollar. You get to wipe a toxic, fraudulent asset off your books quietly today, and I get total legal control of the debt. They had absolutely no leverage, and they knew it. The bank executives scrambled to draft the paperwork and signed the transfer documents within the hour. By the time I walked out of that high-rise boardroom, my firm owned every single cent Donovan owed. I was officially his biggest and only legal creditor. I held the leash, and the collar was tightly fastened around his neck. As I was getting back into my waiting car, my phone vibrated with a priority notification. It was a mass corporate email sent from Donovan to his entire startup staff, his investors, and his board of directors. The subject line read, "Emergency board meeting to secure our future." I opened the email and read Donovan's arrogant, self-congratulatory message. He was proudly announcing that he had just single-handedly saved the company by orchestrating a massive, lucrative merger with a faceless venture capital conglomerate. He demanded everyone attend a mandatory board meeting tomorrow morning to officially approve the acquisition and celebrate his brilliant leadership. I locked my phone and let out a genuine cold laugh. Donovan was completely unaware that his corporate debt had been aggressively sold. He honestly believed a wealthy, anonymous savior was stepping in to bail him out of his financial crimes and make him richer than ever. He had no idea the faceless conglomerate he was so eager to merge with was actually me. And tomorrow morning, I was going to walk into his boardroom and burn his entire world to ashes. I was still staring at Donovan's arrogant email when my private phone rang. It was Andre. I answered immediately, expecting a quick update on his exit strategy, but his voice was tight and rushed. "Peyton, do not say a word," Andre instructed quietly. "Just listen. Mute your microphone and keep the line open. I want a witness for what is about to happen." I pressed the mute button on my screen, just as I heard the unmistakable sound of a heavy wooden door slamming open in the background. High-heeled shoes clicked aggressively across a hardwood floor. It was Isabella. She had somehow tracked Andre's location, likely using a shared family app, and realized he had been at the coffee shop with me. Her voice came through the phone speaker, shrill and dripping with absolute venom. "I know you met with her," Isabella screamed. "My mother saw Peyton's car driving away from the industrial district and your location pinged right next to it. What did you give that pathetic squatter?" Andre did not raise his voice. He sounded like a man who had finally reached the absolute limit of his patience. "I gave her the truth, Isabella. I gave her the raw, unedited ledgers for your brother's company. Donovan is a fraud. He has embezzled millions, and I refuse to attach my professional auditing credentials to a sinking ship." The sound of glass shattering echoed through the phone. Isabella had clearly thrown something against the wall of his home office. "You listen to me right now," she shrieked. "Donovan has a massive merger meeting tomorrow morning with a major conglomerate. He needs a spotless financial bill of health to pass their due diligence. You are going to log into your accounting firm's portal, and you are going to digitally stamp his fake ledgers as perfectly clean. You are going to save my brother's company, Andre." "I cannot do that," Andre replied, his tone remaining terrifyingly calm. "Falsifying tax documents and corporate audits is a federal crime. I am not going to prison to protect a man who steals from his own investors." "You owe this family," Isabella demanded, leaning entirely into her toxic entitlement. "We elevated you. You would be nothing but a low-level bean counter without the high society connections my mother and brother gave you. We brought you into our world. If you do not sit down at that computer and clear Donovan's books right now, I will divorce you. I will take this house. I will take half of your pension. I will hire my mother's ruthless lawyers and drain every single cent you have ever earned. You will be absolutely nothing. There was a long, heavy silence on the line. I held my breath in the back of my car waiting for Andre's response. When he finally spoke, his voice was a low, dangerous rumble that commanded total authority. I built my career on my own merit, Andre said. You built your entire life on my paycheck. I want you to look inside the leather briefcase on the desk. I heard the sound of brass latches snapping open and the rustle of heavy paper. What is this? Isabella asked, her aggressive tone suddenly faltering. Those are not the approved tax documents for your brother Andre, stated clinically. That is a divorce petition. I filed it 3 days ago. And attached to the back of that petition is a complete line-by-line forensic breakdown of my personal savings accounts. Did you really think an auditor would not notice you siphoning money out of our joint accounts? You stole $40,000 of my hard-earned money over the last 6 months, Isabella. You transferred it to dummy accounts to buy Catherine limited edition designer bags and fund your luxury spa weekends. Isabella let out a breathless gasp. Andre, I can explain that. Mom just needed a small loan to keep up appearances. It was not a loan, Andre interrupted sharply. It was theft. And because I filed those papers and submitted the evidence of your financial crimes to the judge, all of my assets are legally frozen. You cannot touch my pension. You cannot touch my car. And you certainly do not get this house because I paid the entire down payment myself. I am done being a pawn for a family of racists and frauds who look down on me while quietly stealing my money. We are finished. I heard Andre's heavy footsteps walking away, followed by the sound of the front door closing firmly. Isabella was left screaming his name in the background, her voice echoing in the empty house. A moment later, Andre picked up his phone. You heard all of that, he asked, his voice rough but undeniably relieved. Every word, I replied, unmuting my microphone. That was a flawless execution, Andre. I am heading to a hotel across town, he said. But Peyton, you need to be extremely careful tonight. Isabella is unhinged. She knows Donovan is her only remaining source of income now that I have cut her off. She knows you have the flash drive with the real audit. She and Catherine will do whatever it takes to stop you from bringing those numbers to the board meeting tomorrow. I smiled, looking out the window as my driver pulled up to the luxury high-rise hotel where I had booked a temporary suite under a secure corporate alias. Let them try, I told him. Get some rest, Andre. Tomorrow we go to war. I took the private elevator up to the penthouse level. I had chosen this specific hotel because my venture capital firm owned a controlling stake in the hospitality group, meaning I had full access to upgrade the security protocols for my room. I stepped inside the suite, locked the heavy door, and poured myself a glass of red wine. I did not turn on the main lights. I simply sat in the plush armchair facing the entryway, the encrypted flash drive resting safely inside my blazer pocket. 2 hours passed in total silence. Then my phone screen illuminated in the dark. It was a priority alert from the private security team monitoring the hallway cameras outside my suite. I opened the live video feed. Isabella had not just gotten angry. She had gotten criminal. She was pacing nervously in the carpeted hallway right outside my door. Standing next to her was a man dressed in dark clothing, carrying a heavy canvas bag of tools. Isabella was frantically handing him a thick stack of cash. She had actually hired a black market locksmith to break into my hotel room in the middle of the night to steal the flash drive containing Donovan's audit. I watched on my screen as the man knelt down, slid a tension wrench into my door lock, and pulled out a specialized drill. Isabella crossed her arms, a desperate, malicious grin spreading across her face. She thought she was about to save her brother's empire. She had no idea I was sitting just inches away on the other side of the door, waiting for them to cross the threshold so I could spring the ultimate trap. The heavy brass door handle of my hotel suite clicked open. I remained perfectly still in the plush armchair in the corner of the dark room. The sliver of hallway light widened, casting a long shadow across the carpet. Isabella slipped inside, moving with the frantic, jerky motions of an amateur criminal. The locksmith she had hired wisely stayed out in the hallway, letting her cross the threshold alone. Isabella pulled out her phone, using the flashlight to scan the room. She swept the beam over the unmade bed, the empty dining table, and finally my leather work bag resting on the desk. She let out a quiet gasp of triumph and darted toward it. She ripped the bag open, frantically digging through my folders and makeup pouches, searching for the encrypted flash drive Andre had given me. She was so consumed by her greed and desperation that she did not notice the two large shadows standing perfectly still on either side of the entryway. I reached over and flipped the switch on the floor lamp. The sudden blinding light flooded the suite. "Looking for something specific, Isabella?" I asked, my voice calm and conversational. Isabella shrieked, dropping my bag onto the floor. She spun around, her eyes wide with absolute terror. "Peyton!" she stammered, her chest heaving. "I was just retrieving something that belongs to my brother. You stole company property." "Actually," I replied, standing up and smoothing my blazer, "you just committed a felony." The two shadows stepped forward into the light. They were uniformed police officers from the downtown precinct. I had called them 30 minutes ago, providing them with the live security feed of an unidentified man drilling into my hotel door while a woman paid him in cash. The officers did not hesitate. They moved swiftly across the room, grabbing Isabella by her arms and spinning her around. "Ma'am, you are under arrest for breaking and entering," the taller officer stated, pulling a pair of metal handcuffs from his belt. Isabella started thrashing violently, screaming at the top of her lungs. "You cannot do this. Do you know who my family is? My brother is a CEO. Let me go." The cold click of the handcuffs snapping shut over her wrists was the only answer she received. The locksmith in the hallway took one look at the police and sprinted for the exit, though I knew hotel security already had the emergency doors blocked. Isabella sobbed hysterically as the officers dragged her out of my suite. Her designer shoes scraped against the carpet, her entitlement completely shattered by the reality of the criminal justice system. I watched her go without a single ounce of pity. At 7 o'clock the next morning, my phone began to ring incessantly. The caller ID displayed Catherine's name. I let it ring 3 times, took a sip of my black tea, and answered. "Peyton." Catherine sobbed into the receiver, her voice completely devoid of its usual arrogant bite. "They have Isabella in a holding cell. They are charging her with a felony. You have to call the district attorney right now and tell them this was a misunderstanding. Please, Peyton, we are family." "We are not family." "Catherine," I corrected her sharply, "your daughter hired a criminal to break into my room and steal evidence. She belongs in a cell." Catherine wailed loudly. "I will do anything. Please, I am begging you. If Isabella gets a felony conviction, her life is over. She will never recover from the scandal. I will pay you. I will make Donovan give you whatever you want." I set my teacup down on the saucer. "You do not have any money to give me, Catherine. But you are right. You will do exactly what I want. I will call the district attorney and decline to press charges, but only if you meet my single condition." "Name it," Catherine gasped. "Anything." "You are hosting the monthly charity luncheon at your country club today at noon," I said, checking the schedule I had memorized long ago. "You are going to stand up in front of every single wealthy socialite in that dining room. You will tap your glass, command their attention, and you will loudly confess that your son's company is drowning in debt. You will tell them your family is completely broke and that you have been faking your lifestyle for months." Catherine stopped breathing. I could hear the sheer, unadulterated panic radiating through the phone. "Peyton, I cannot do that. Those women will destroy me. I will be a laughingstock. I will be banished from polite society forever. Please ask for something else." I hung up the phone. It rang again less than 5 seconds later. I answered it in silence. "I will do it," Catherine whispered, her voice totally broken. "I will do it." At noon, I walked into the grand dining room of the elite country club. I did not sit at a table. I stood near the mahogany bar at the back of the room, completely out of Catherine's line of sight, blending in with the waitstaff. The room was packed with women wearing diamonds and pastel dresses, sipping champagne and gossiping. Catherine sat at the head table, her face ashen, her hands shaking so badly she could barely hold her water glass. She stood up slowly. She picked up a silver spoon and tapped it against her crystal goblet. The sharp chiming sound cut through the chatter. The room fell entirely silent, hundreds of eyes turning to look at the woman who had spent years acting superior to every single one of them. "I have an announcement to make," Catherine said. Her voice trembled. She gripped the edge of the tablecloth to keep herself from collapsing. "I need to be honest with all of you. My son Donovan is not a successful tech founder. His company is failing. He is bankrupt. And my family has absolutely no money left. We are completely broke." A collective dramatic gasp echoed through the dining room. Women covered their mouths, whispering frantically to one another. The social destruction was instantaneous and absolute. Catherine stood there, tears ruining her expensive makeup, waiting for someone, anyone, to offer her a word of sympathy. No one did. Instead, the heavy wooden doors of the dining room swung open. The general manager of the country club marched straight toward Catherine's table. He did not look sympathetic. He looked furious. He stopped in front of her and slammed a thick white envelope down onto the table. "Since you are publicly declaring insolvency, Catherine, I must present this," the manager announced, his voice carrying across the silent room. "This is your unpaid $50,000 catering and membership bill. You have been dodging our accounting department for 6 months. Your membership at this club is permanently revoked, effective immediately. Security will escort you off the premises." Catherine let out a gut-wrenching sob, burying her face in her hands. She had traded her entire social identity to save her daughter from prison. I watched the security guards approach her table. I placed a $20 bill on the bar for the bartender, turned on my heel, and walked out into the bright afternoon sun. The mother and sister were handled. Now it was time to crush the son. I stepped into my waiting car, leaving Catherine to face the ruins of her high society life. My phone buzzed with an update from my legal team. The news of Isabella being arrested for a felony break-in and Catherine being publicly expelled from the country club had already reached Donovan. My estranged husband was currently pacing his corner office in a state of absolute panic. His family was crumbling. His sister was sitting in a holding cell, and his mother was a social pariah. He knew the emergency board meeting tomorrow morning was his only lifeline. He needed this merger to go perfectly to secure the funds to save himself and his family. But there was one massive problem keeping him awake. He did not have Andre to sign off on his fraudulent tax documents anymore. With Andre refusing to falsify the audit, Donovan knew the acquiring conglomerate would eventually uncover the missing $2.5 million during their routine due diligence. He was trapped. I sat in my secure hotel suite, a cup of hot tea in my hand, watching his office through the discreet security cameras, my firm now legally controlled. When my venture capital firm purchased his $8 million debt portfolio, we also triggered a standard debt covenant that granted us immediate administrative oversight of the company's digital infrastructure. Donovan was completely unaware that his own security cameras were now reporting directly to my encrypted laptop. Brianna was with him in the office, playing the role of the supportive partner while secretly panicking about her own legal liability. She paced the floor, her diamond necklace sparkling under the harsh fluorescent lights. She pointed out that if the board conducted a deep dive forensic scan of the physical servers tomorrow, they would easily find the deleted files. They would see the ghost accounts and the money funneled to her luxury apartment. Donovan looked terrified. He realized that deleting files from a desktop was not enough. The central servers held the raw data. Brianna leaned in close and whispered a highly illegal solution. She suggested they go down to the server room at midnight, upload a destructive malware virus via a physical flash drive, and wipe the entire mainframe clean. They could easily blame the catastrophic data loss on a random cyber attack. They could claim a disgruntled former employee or a foreign hacker destroyed their records just hours before the merger. It was a desperate, incredibly stupid plan. And it was exactly the kind of arrogant move I was counting on them to make. At exactly midnight, the corporate headquarters was completely dark and deserted. The security guards were doing their routine exterior patrols. I watched the live feed on my screen as Donovan and Brianna crept through the glowing blue corridors of the server room. Donovan was sweating profusely, his expensive suit jacket discarded somewhere on the floor above. Brianna held a small silver flash drive tightly in her manicured hand. They looked like two amateur thieves breaking into a bank vault, completely unaware that the vault was already empty, and the doors were set to lock behind them. I had instructed my cybersecurity team to lay a digital honeypot trap on the mainframes days ago, anticipating this exact scenario. Donovan typed his executive override code into the main terminal. He accessed the core financial database, the exact location where all his embezzlement records were stored. Brianna plugged the silver flash drive into the universal serial bus port. I watched her fingers tremble as she executed the malware program. She hit the enter key, expecting the screens to go black and the damning data to vanish into the digital abyss. Instead, the entire server room plunged into absolute darkness for a split second. Then every single monitor in the massive room flared to life, glowing a violent, piercing red. A loud, rhythmic warning siren began to blare through the overhead speakers, echoing down the empty corporate hallways. Donovan stumbled backward, crashing into a heavy metal server rack. Brianna screamed, trying desperately to yank the flash drive out of the terminal, but the system had automatically engaged a physical port lock to preserve the evidence. The red screens flickered and my face appeared on every single monitor in the room. I had pre-recorded the video earlier that afternoon, sitting comfortably in my hotel chair. In the video, I looked directly at the camera with a calm, predatory smile. "Good evening, Donovan," my recorded voice echoed through the server room speakers. "And hello to you too, Brianna. I assumed you might try something desperate tonight. When my venture capital firm purchased your $8 million debt portfolio, we also acquired full administrative oversight of this digital infrastructure. You did not just plug a virus into your company mainframe. You plugged it directly into a legally mandated digital honeypot designed to catch corporate sabotage." Donovan stared at the screens, his mouth hanging open in pure, unadulterated horror. He grabbed his hair, pacing frantically as my recorded message continued to dismantle his entire existence. "Did you really think a fake cyber attack would save you?" I asked through the monitors. "As we speak, this security system is compiling a high-definition live broadcast of you and your mistress attempting to destroy corporate financial records. And because you triggered the critical security breach protocol, this live closed-circuit television feed is currently being emailed directly to the personal inbox of every single board member, every major investor, and the local authorities. You wanted a memorable merger meeting tomorrow morning, Donovan. You are definitely going to get one. I will see you in the boardroom." The video feed ended, leaving the red warning screens flashing brilliantly against their terrified faces. The trap was perfectly sprung. I sat in the back of my idling black car, watching the live security feed on my encrypted tablet. The emergency board meeting had officially begun 10 minutes ago in the top-floor conference room of the corporate headquarters. The atmosphere inside that room was absolute poison. The heavy mahogany table was surrounded by 7 furious investors. Donovan stood at the head of the table, sweating through his expensive tailored suit. He had clearly not slept a single minute since the alarms went off at midnight. His eyes were bloodshot, and his hands gripped the edges of the glass podium so tightly his knuckles were completely white. Yet in the face of total disaster, he was still trying to deploy his signature manipulative charm. Sitting directly to his right was Brianna. She was wearing a sharp designer blazer that she had undoubtedly purchased with stolen corporate funds. She sat with her posture rigidly straight, projecting an arrogant, unearned confidence to the room of seasoned executives. She genuinely believed she was about to become the second most powerful person in the building. She thought the digital wipe had worked, completely ignorant of the fact that they had broadcast their own corporate sabotage to every person in that room. Donovan cleared his throat and projected his voice, desperately attempting to pacify the angry board members who were demanding answers about the bizarre midnight video they had all received. "I assure you, gentlemen, it was nothing more than a highly proactive security stress test." Donovan lied smoothly, flashing a practiced artificial smile that made my stomach turn. In preparation for our massive merger today, my team and I wanted to ensure our firewalls were impenetrable. The flashing red screens and the automated emails were simply a glitch in the testing protocol. There was no real threat. Our data is perfectly secure, and our corporate valuation remains flawless. Brianna nodded eagerly in agreement, playing the role of the devoted executive assistant perfectly. She offered a bright, entirely fake smile to the investors, blissfully unaware of the guillotine hanging directly over her neck. I locked my tablet and handed it to my driver. It was time to end this ridiculous charade. I stepped out of the vehicle into the crisp morning air. I was wearing a pristine, tailored white power suit. I wanted to look like absolute ice, a walking representation of cold, calculating authority. I walked through the revolving glass doors of the corporate lobby with purposeful, measured steps. Flanking my right side was Andre. My African-American brother-in-law looked incredibly imposing and dignified, carrying a thick, locked leather briefcase that contained the exact forensic audit that would send Donovan to federal prison. On my left were two elite corporate attorneys from my venture capital firm carrying the finalized debt acquisition paperwork. We bypassed the front reception desk completely. The junior employees in the lobby stopped dead in their tracks, staring at us with wide eyes. They recognized me as the chief executive officer's wife, but the energy I was radiating today was entirely different. I was not the quiet, supportive spouse bringing lunch to the office. I was a corporate executioner. I did not stop to ask for permission or scan a visitor badge. I simply swiped my new master administrative keycard, and the private executive elevator doors slid open immediately. The ride to the top floor was totally silent. Andre looked at me and gave a single firm nod. We were ready for war. The elevator chimed, and we stepped out onto the plush carpet of the executive suite. I walked straight toward the heavy mahogany doors of the main boardroom. I did not knock. I placed both hands on the brass handles and pushed the doors open with enough force that they slammed loudly against the interior walls. The sudden crash echoed through the massive room, instantly silencing Donovan's pathetic, lying presentation. Every single head in the room snapped toward the entrance. Donovan stopped mid-sentence, his mouth hanging open in shock. The artificial smile melted off his face, instantly replaced by a mask of pure, unadulterated rage. He saw me standing there in my white suit, and the veins in his neck visibly bulged. Brianna leaped out of her leather chair, her arrogant composure shattering into a million pieces as she recognized me. She looked like a terrified, cornered animal. Donovan's eyes darted from me to the two expensive attorneys and finally landed on Andre. Confusion washed over him for a fraction of a second before his massive ego and anger completely took over. "What is the meaning of this?" Donovan screamed, slamming his fist down heavily on the glass podium. "Peyton, you are completely out of your mind. How did you even get past security downstairs?" He pointed a trembling finger at me, spit flying from his lips in his outrage. "I am in the middle of a critical merger presentation. I told you I wanted a divorce, and now you show up here to throw a jealous tantrum. Get out of my building right now." I did not say a single word. I did not raise my voice or react to his pathetic screaming. I simply maintained my cold, steady smile and took a confident step forward into the room. Andre stepped in right behind me, his posture unwavering and absolute. Donovan completely lost whatever tiny shred of professional composure he had left. He realized he was losing control of the room, and he panicked. He turned wildly to the two armed corporate security guards stationed near the back exits of the boardroom. "Guards, remove this crazy woman immediately!" Donovan commanded, his voice cracking with high-pitched desperation. "My ex-wife is having a mental breakdown. Grab her and physically throw her out into the lobby. Take that accountant with her. I want them both removed from the premises right now." He pointed aggressively at the door. He fully expected the guards to rush forward and drag me out, kicking and screaming. He expected to maintain his absolute, unquestioned authority in front of his board of directors. The security guards did not move a single muscle. They stood perfectly still, their hands resting neutrally at their sides, their eyes fixed straight ahead. Donovan stared at them, his face turning a dangerous shade of purple. "I said grab her!" he bellowed, his voice echoing off the high ceilings. Before he could shout another useless order, the lead board member, a highly respected and ruthless investor named Thomas, stood up slowly from his leather chair at the center of the table. Thomas cleared his throat, his expression grim and utterly serious. "Sit down and lower your voice right now," Donovan Thomas ordered sharply. "Security is not going to touch her." The entire boardroom went dead silent. You could have heard a pin drop on the carpet. Donovan looked at the lead investor as if the man had just spoken a foreign language. "But she is my crazy ex-wife," Donovan stammered, completely losing his footing and his confidence. "She does not belong in this building." Thomas looked directly at me with a profound, undeniable level of professional respect. "She is not here as your ex-wife," Donovan Thomas announced, his voice carrying the heavy weight of absolute finality. "She is here as the primary representative of the venture capital firm that just acquired 51% of this company's voting debt." Thomas gestured toward the head of the table where Donovan was standing. "You need to step away from that podium, Donovan. She is your boss." Donovan stared at Thomas, then back at me, his reality entirely fracturing in real time. The silence in the room was absolute. I walked toward the front of the boardroom, my heels clicking rhythmically against the hardwood floor. Donovan instinctively took a step back, shrinking away from the glass podium as if it had suddenly caught fire. I did not rush. I took my time, letting the crushing weight of my new authority settle heavily over the room. I reached the head of the heavy mahogany table and placed the thick leather-bound binder I had been carrying directly onto the glass surface. The dull thud echoed like a gavel striking a sound block. "Gentlemen," I began, keeping my voice perfectly level and commanding. "As Thomas just confirmed, my firm now holds the controlling majority of your corporate debt, which has been converted into voting equity due to the severe breach of your financial covenants. You thought you were meeting today to approve a life-saving merger. Instead, you are here to face the catastrophic reality of your current leadership." I nodded to Andre. He stepped forward, radiating absolute professional dignity. He connected his encrypted tablet to the boardroom projection system. The massive screen behind Donovan flickered, replacing the optimistic, colorful merger presentation with a stark black and white spreadsheet. It was the raw, unedited financial ledger. Board members leaned forward in their expensive leather chairs, squinting at the numbers. The atmosphere shifted from confusion to pure, unadulterated outrage. Andre began his presentation with surgical precision. "My name is Andre, and I am here today as the independent senior auditor representing the acquiring venture capital firm. What you are looking at on this screen is the real, unedited financial history of this startup over the past 18 months. The documents your chief executive officer provided to you previously were entirely fabricated." Donovan's face turned a sickly pale shade of green. He gripped the edge of the table, swaying slightly on his feet. "That is a lie," he choked out, his voice cracking. "This is a setup. Peyton is manipulating the numbers because she is bitter about our divorce. Do not listen to them." Thomas slammed his hand flat on the table, glaring at Donovan with absolute disgust. "Shut your mouth and let the man finish," Thomas ordered. Andre did not even blink at Donovan's pathetic outburst. He tapped his tablet, highlighting a series of massive withdrawals in bright yellow. As you can clearly see, Andre continued, his deep voice filling the room. $2.5 million of investor funds were systematically drained from the primary operational accounts. These funds were not used for research, development, or marketing. They were routed through a sophisticated network of phantom vendor accounts. I stepped up beside Andre, taking over the presentation. I clicked a button on the remote and the screen split in half. On the left were the dates and amounts of the phantom withdrawals. On the right were the corresponding real-world purchases. The dates matched perfectly down to the exact hour. I looked around the table at the furious investors. On March 12th, I stated coldly, $200,000 was siphoned from your research and development budget. That same afternoon, that exact amount was used to pay the cash deposit on a luxury downtown penthouse apartment currently occupied by Donovan's executive assistant. On July 4th, $50,000 vanished from the marketing fund. Later that evening, Donovan purchased a diamond necklace from an exclusive downtown jeweler. The board members began shouting in outrage. One investor threw his pen across the table. Another buried his face in his hands, realizing the millions they had poured into this company were completely gone. Donovan looked like he was about to physically collapse. He looked wildly around the room, searching for a single sympathetic face and finding absolutely nothing but hatred. "Peyton, please," he begged, his voice dropping to a pathetic, desperate whisper. "I was going to put the money back. I was expanding my network. I just needed this merger to go through and I would have balanced the books. You have to believe me. We can fix this together." I looked him dead in the eye, my expression completely devoid of any pity or compassion. I let him stand there, drowning in his own profound humiliation, before I delivered the final fatal blow to his ego. "I am not your partner anymore, Donovan," I said, my voice ringing with absolute, unshakable authority. "I am the majority shareholder of this company. And as majority shareholder, my very first act is firing you as Chief Executive Officer, effective immediately. You are terminated with cause, and you will leave this building without a single cent of severance." The finality of the statement hit Donovan like a physical strike. He grabbed his chest, gasping for air as his entire empire dissolved into dust, right in front of his eyes. He stumbled back against the whiteboard, looking like a hollow shell of the arrogant man who had tried to buy my silence with a $10,000 check just days ago. Suddenly, the sound of loud, frantic crying filled the boardroom. Brianna leaped up from her leather chair. Her face was flushed, and she was already pushing herself away from Donovan as if he were a contagious disease. She threw her hands up in the air, playing the role of the innocent, traumatized victim to absolute perfection. "I had no idea," Brianna sobbed, her voice echoing dramatically off the walls. She looked at the board members with wide, tear-filled eyes. "He lied to me. He told me the company was incredibly successful. He told me the apartment and the jewelry were paid for with his personal bonuses. I am just a young assistant. He manipulated me and took advantage of my trust. You cannot blame me for the actions of a corrupt CEO." She actually managed to squeeze out a few real tears, wiping her mascara carefully to ensure she looked appropriately distressed. She thought her youth and her tears would save her. She thought she could just walk out of that boardroom, play the naive young woman, and find another rich man to manipulate. I simply smiled. It was a cold, predatory smile that made Brianna freeze right in her tracks. I pressed the button on my presentation remote one last time. The screen flashed, replacing the financial ledgers with a high-resolution scan of 3 different banking documents. Brianna's jaw dropped. The fake tears instantly stopped flowing. I pointed to the massive screen. "Those are the incorporation documents for the fraudulent shell companies used to launder the stolen $2.5 million, I announced clearly to the room. And right there at the bottom of every single page is the authorizing signature. I turned back to look at the terrified woman standing next to my ex-husband. "You are not a victim, Brianna," I stated, my voice echoing with terrifying certainty. "You signed the paperwork. You set up the dummy accounts. You are a willing, fully aware co-conspirator in a multi-million-dollar federal fraud case." Brianna backed away from the table, shaking her head in sheer panic. "No," she gasped. "No, I did not know what I was signing. I was just following orders." I folded my hands in front of me, utterly unmoved by her desperation. "Save your breath," I told her. "You can try that pathetic excuse on the authorities. The police are waiting in the lobby." The heavy oak doors of the boardroom swung shut as Brianna sprinted into the hallway. She did not even bother looking back at the man she had planned to build an empire with. Survival instinct had completely taken over her entire body. Through the glass walls of the conference room, I watched her shove past 2 junior marketing analysts, nearly tripping over her own expensive heels in her desperate rush toward the emergency exit stairs. Donovan yelled her name, his voice cracking with absolute panic, but she was already gone. He tried to follow her, but Andre stepped smoothly into his path, blocking the exit with his solid, imposing frame. "Let her run," I told my legal team, keeping my voice entirely calm and unbothered. "A cornered rat will always flee a sinking ship, but she has absolutely nowhere to go." While I remained in the boardroom to finalize Donovan's termination, my private security team was already tracking Brianna's every single move. I had assigned 2 former federal investigators to tail her the moment she left the corporate building. My encrypted tablet buzzed with continuous real-time updates. Brianna had managed to hail a ride-share vehicle and was heading straight toward her luxury downtown penthouse. The very same penthouse Donovan had purchased for her using $200,000 of stolen investor capital. According to the live updates from my surveillance team, Brianna burst into the lobby of her building and took the private elevator up to the top floor. She was moving with the frantic, messy energy of a criminal who knew the police were rapidly closing in. She tore through her custom closets recklessly, throwing designer dresses, silk blouses, and expensive shoes into a large leather suitcase. She was abandoning the heavy furniture and the custom artwork, focusing only on items she could easily carry and liquidate for fast cash on the black market. But her ultimate prize, her perceived golden ticket out of this massive corporate disaster, was resting inside a velvet box on her vanity. It was the $50,000 diamond choker Donovan had draped around her neck at the anniversary gala. She snatched the necklace, shoved it deep into the inner pocket of her designer handbag, and zipped the suitcase shut. She genuinely believed that piece of fine jewelry was her personal property. She thought she could simply pawn it in another state and start a new life with a massive pile of untraceable cash. She was entirely ignorant of how ruthless corporate asset recovery actually worked. 3 hours before the board meeting even started, I had filed an expedited legal injunction regarding all physical assets purchased with the embezzled funds. Because my venture capital firm now owned the controlling debt of the startup, every single item Donovan had bought, using stolen company money, was legally considered stolen corporate property. That included the penthouse, the luxury cars, and especially that $50,000 diamond necklace. I had registered the exact serial number and description of those diamonds into the National Stolen Property Database. I had also filed a flight risk alert with the authorities, heavily flagging her identity. My tablet buzzed again with a final location update. Brianna had arrived at the international airport. She dragged her heavy suitcase through the sliding glass doors of the terminal, constantly checking over her shoulder like a hunted animal. The airport was packed with afternoon travelers, business executives, and families heading out for vacations. Brianna marched straight toward the ticketing counter of a major airline, frantically trying to purchase a last-minute one-way ticket to a warm, non-extradition destination. She slapped her credit card down on the counter, demanding the next available flight out of the city. But she never even made it to the departure gate. As she grabbed her printed boarding pass and rushed toward the Transportation Security Administration checkpoint, the trap I had carefully laid finally snapped shut. She placed her designer handbag onto the conveyor belt and walked through the metal detector. The moment her bag passed through the scanning machine, an automated security alert flagged the system. The scanner had detected the dense, high-value signature of the undeclared diamonds, perfectly matching a high-priority stolen property profile. 4 uniformed Transportation Security Administration officers immediately stepped out from behind the screening stations, physically blocking her path. 2 armed airport police officers flanked them, their hands resting firmly on their utility belts. "Step out of the line immediately," the lead officer commanded, his voice cutting through the noisy, crowded terminal. Brianna's face lost all its color. She tried to grab her suitcase off the belt, but an officer firmly pushed her hand away. "What is going on?" she demanded, her voice shrill and trembling with sheer panic. "I have a flight to catch. You are making a terrible mistake. I am an executive at a major tech firm." The police officer pulled on a pair of blue latex gloves, unzipped her designer handbag right there on the stainless steel inspection table, and pulled out the velvet box. He flipped it open, exposing the brilliant $50,000 diamond choker to the harsh fluorescent lights of the security checkpoint. "We have an active federal alert indicating this specific piece of jewelry is stolen corporate property," the officer stated loudly, making sure the growing crowd of onlookers could hear exactly why she was being detained. "It is flagged as an asset purchased with embezzled funds from a corporate entity. You are in possession of stolen goods." "I did not steal it," Brianna shrieked, tears of pure terror welling in her eyes. "My boyfriend gave it to me. He is a chief executive officer. It was a gift. You cannot do this to me." The officers were completely unmoved by her pathetic crying performance. "A gift bought with stolen money is still stolen money," the officer replied coldly. "Turn around and place your hands behind your back." Right there in the middle of the crowded airport terminal, with dozens of travelers stopping to record the scene on their smartphones, Brianna was forcefully spun around. The cold, heavy metal handcuffs clicked tightly around her wrists. The arrogant, confident mistress who had paraded around the anniversary gala just 10 days ago was now sobbing hysterically, being treated exactly like a common thief in public. "Please, you have to let me make a phone call," Brianna begged as the officers began marching her toward the airport holding facility. "I need to call Donovan. He will clear this up. He will pay my bail. He has millions of dollars. Let me call him." The lead officer sighed, pulling a holding cell phone from his pocket. He dialed the private executive number Brianna rattled off through her tears. She leaned forward, desperate for her wealthy, powerful lover to answer the phone and rescue her from this nightmare. She listened to the line ring once, then twice. Then, instead of Donovan's reassuring voice, a cold, automated operator message echoed loudly through the phone speaker. "The number you have reached has been disconnected and is no longer in service." Brianna's knees completely gave out. The officers had to physically hold her up by her arms as she collapsed into a puddle of absolute despair. She finally realized the horrifying truth. Donovan was not a powerful CEO anymore. He had no money, no company, and zero power to save her. He could not even afford to keep his own phone line active. She had bet her entire future on a fraudulent, arrogant man, and now she was going to pay the ultimate price completely alone. I remained in the executive boardroom while my private security team escorted Donovan out of the corporate building. He was physically stripped of his access cards right in the lobby. His corporate cell phone and data plans were instantly deactivated by my information technology department. That was precisely why Brianna heard a disconnected operator message at the airport. Donovan was completely severed from the digital and physical empire he thought he had built. He was entirely isolated, stripped of his title, his income, and his power in a matter of minutes. I sat at the head of the heavy mahogany table, poured myself a fresh glass of water, and opened my encrypted laptop to track his next predictable move. I knew exactly where he would go. A narcissist, entirely stripped of his unearned authority, always runs back to the person who enables his delusions. Donovan drove straight back to the $3 million mansion to hide behind his mother. My private security team had a surveillance vehicle stationed discreetly down the street from the estate. They reported that Donovan sprinted up the long, manicured driveway, his expensive tailored suit wrinkled and soaked in sweat. Inside the house, Catherine was already pacing the hardwood floors in a state of absolute hysteria. She was still reeling from her own catastrophic humiliation at the country club, where she had been publicly expelled and handed a massive unpaid catering bill. But the moment her golden boy burst through the front double doors, in a state of total panic, her toxic maternal entitlement went into overdrive. Because Donovan had integrated his entire home security and smart speaker system into his corporate account network, my firm now legally controlled the administrative access to the property. I tapped a few keys on my laptop and accessed the audio logs from the living room. I listened through my computer speakers as Donovan collapsed onto the expensive imported sofa. He confessed the entire disaster to his mother. He told her I had taken over the company, fired him in front of the entire board of directors, and that the police were likely building a massive federal fraud case against him. Catherine did not reprimand him for embezzling millions of dollars from innocent investors. She did not express a single ounce of remorse for the crimes he had committed. Instead, she immediately began plotting a way to destroy me. I listened with a cold smile as she fiercely attempted to soothe his bruised ego. She told him not to worry about a temporary corporate setback. She confidently declared that they still possessed a $3 million piece of prime real estate in one of the most exclusive neighborhoods in the city. She instructed Donovan to wash his face, calm his nerves, and put on a fresh suit. Her brilliant master plan was to march directly down to their private wealth management bank, take out a massive second mortgage on the mansion, and use the liquid cash to hire the most ruthless, expensive criminal defense attorneys in the state. She promised him they would crush me in court and take the company back by force. I actually laughed out loud in the empty boardroom. I closed the audio feed, packed my documents into my leather briefcase, and waited for the inevitable phone call. Less than an hour later, my personal cell phone rang. It was the senior branch manager at Donovan's elite private bank. Because my venture capital firm had executed the hostile debt acquisition that morning, all financial institutions holding assets tied to Donovan's corporate portfolio were legally required to notify my team of any attempted account activity. The bank manager sounded incredibly nervous and uncomfortable. He informed me that Donovan and Catherine were currently sitting in his glass-enclosed office, aggressively demanding a multi-million-dollar line of credit against the deed to their home. I instructed the manager to put his office phone on speaker and place it on his desk so I could listen to the glorious moment of realization. Through the secure phone line, I heard Catherine speaking with her usual arrogant, demanding tone. She told the banker to expedite the loan paperwork immediately, boasting loudly about the massive equity they held in the property and how they needed the funds transferred by the end of the business day. The banker cleared his throat. The profound pity in his voice was unmistakable. He informed Catherine and Donovan that he could not approve a second mortgage. He could not approve a basic personal loan. In fact, he could not authorize a single financial transaction for them under any circumstances. Catherine slammed her hand on the desk, demanding to know why, threatening to have the man fired and his career ruined for his blatant incompetence. The banker delivered the killing blow with absolute professional detachment. He explained that 2 years ago, when Donovan's startup was rapidly burning through its initial funding rounds, Donovan had secretly leveraged the deed of the mansion as collateral against his massive corporate bank loans. He had bet the entire estate on his failing company without telling his mother a single word about the immense financial risk. I heard Catherine gasp loudly, a sharp intake of air that sounded like she had been physically struck. She turned on Donovan, her voice rising in sheer panic as she demanded to know if the banker was telling the truth. Donovan stammered helplessly, completely unable to form a coherent sentence to defend his reckless actions. But the bank manager was not finished. He smoothly delivered the final, devastating reality check. He informed them that because a private venture capital firm had purchased all of Donovan's corporate debt earlier that morning, that same firm had also legally acquired all the collateral attached to those specific loans. The bank no longer held the deed to the mansion. My firm held the deed. I was the sole legal lien holder of the entire property. They did not own a $3 million house. They were effectively trespassing in a building that belonged entirely and exclusively to me. The profound, suffocating silence that filled that bank office was the sweetest sound I had ever experienced in my entire life. Donovan finally connected the dots. If I owned the corporate debt, I owned the roof over his head. I owned the hardwood floors he walked on. I owned absolutely everything he thought made him a powerful man. I ended the call with the bank manager. I opened my messaging application and typed out a short, simple text message to Donovan's personal cell phone. I hit send, grabbed my coat, and headed for the executive elevator to finish what I started. Across town, sitting in the absolute ruins of his financial reality, Donovan felt his phone vibrate in his pocket. He pulled it out with shaking hands, his breath catching in his throat as he read the message I had just sent him. "Check your front door." Donovan stared at the text message on his screen, his face draining of all color. He showed the phone to his mother inside that glass-enclosed bank office. I did not need to be in the room to know the exact moment the panic truly set in. They sprinted out of the financial district, their previous arrogance entirely replaced by the cold, suffocating grip of terror. They drove like absolute maniacs across the city, speeding back to the exclusive suburban neighborhood they thought they ruled. I was already waiting for them. My black vehicle was parked quietly across the street from the massive $3 million estate. I sat in the comfortable leather seat, sipping a bottle of sparkling water, watching the scene unfold with deep, profound satisfaction. Donovan's car screeched into the long, circular driveway. He slammed the transmission into park and threw the door open before the engine even stopped running. He and Catherine scrambled up the wide concrete steps leading to the grand entryway. Nailed directly into the custom-imported oak front doors were bright yellow, legally binding foreclosure and immediate eviction notices. The documents fluttered slightly in the afternoon breeze, a glaring neon sign of their total financial ruin. Catherine lost her mind completely. She tore the heavy paper off the wood, screaming at the top of her lungs that it was a mistake. She punched the security code into the electronic keypad, desperate to reclaim her territory. The lock clicked and she barged inside. The house was exactly as Isabella had left it during the morning eviction, but I had deliberately left one single item behind in the foyer coat closet. It was a designer overnight bag, a piece of luggage Catherine had always despised because it was a brand she could not afford herself. She grabbed the bag by its leather handles, dragged it back out onto the front porch, and marched down the steps just as I instructed my driver to pull my car up to their curb. Catherine saw me step out of the vehicle, and her toxic maternal entitlement went into absolute overdrive. She threw my designer bag violently onto the concrete driveway. She pointed a shaking finger at my face, her features twisted with unadulterated rage. "Do not ever set foot in my house again!" Catherine screamed, her voice echoing down the quiet, wealthy street. "Get out of my house right now. You are nothing but a jealous, pathetic squatter." I stood perfectly still. I did not cry. I did not flinch. I did not raise my voice to match her hysterical shrieking. I simply adjusted the collar of my white blazer, looked her dead in the eye, and delivered the exact words I had been waiting to say. "Actually, Catherine," I replied, a calm, victorious smile spreading across my face, "I already sold this house to a commercial developer this morning, and as a bonus I just fired your son from his own company." Donovan, who had been standing paralyzed near the front doors, stared down at his personal cell phone. The termination email from the board of directors, combined with the automated alerts of his frozen corporate accounts, had finally processed through his inbox. He dropped his phone onto the stone porch. It shattered against the ground, a perfect physical representation of his entire life. His shoulders slumped and his body went entirely slack as the absolute finality of my words hit him. Catherine shook her head wildly, refusing to accept the reality of her shattered high society existence. She continued screaming, insisting that her son's name was on the deed, that I had no legal right to touch her property, and that she would call her ruthless lawyers to destroy me. I folded my arms and watched her unravel. I reminded her loudly enough for the nosy neighbors stepping onto their porches to hear that Donovan leveraged this exact property to secure corporate loans he could not pay back. When my venture capital firm acquired his fraudulent debt this morning, we acquired the collateral. The house belonged to me for exactly 2 hours. That was just long enough for me to sign the deed over to a commercial real estate developer who plans to bulldoze this entire lot to build a luxury condominium complex. Right on cue, a heavy, deafening rumbling sound echoed down the street. A massive yellow commercial bulldozer turned the corner, followed closely by 2 large industrial moving trucks. The heavy machinery rolled up to the curb, its diesel engine roaring, completely drowning out Catherine's pathetic protests. The developer's demolition crew stepped out wearing hard hats and carrying heavy-duty trash bins. Catherine let out a blood-curdling shriek. She ran toward her prized imported rose garden, throwing her arms out wide as if her fragile physical body could stop tons of rolling steel. That rose garden was her ultimate status symbol. She had spent tens of thousands of dollars of stolen investor money to import rare blooms just to make her wealthy neighbors jealous. The foreman of the demolition crew looked at my legal team, verified the property transfer documents with a quick nod, and signaled the bulldozer operator. The heavy metal treads tore directly into the pristine manicured lawn. The steel blade lowered and effortlessly ripped through the imported rose bushes, churning the expensive flowers into a pile of mangled dirt and broken roots. Catherine collapsed onto the driveway, weeping hysterically, as her entire social identity was literally ground into the mud. Donovan did not move to comfort his mother. He stood on the porch staring blankly at the destruction. He had no money, no company, no mistress, and now no home. He was entirely empty, a fraud completely exposed to the light. Suddenly, the wailing sound of approaching sirens cut through the noise of the idling bulldozer. 3 police cruisers sped down the street, their red and blue lights flashing brilliantly. They swerved into the driveway, blocking Donovan's silver sedan completely. Catherine looked up from the ruined dirt, a sudden spark of delusional hope flashing in her tear-filled eyes. She genuinely believed the police were here to arrest me for trespassing. She scrambled to her feet, pointing frantically in my direction, screaming for the officers to arrest the crazy woman destroying her home. The officers ignored her completely. They stepped out of their cruisers, their hands resting on their utility belts. The lead detective walked straight past Catherine's pointing finger, straight past the demolished rose garden, and stopped directly in front of Donovan. The detective pulled a folded warrant from his jacket pocket. He looked Donovan up and down with an expression of cold, professional disgust. Donovan, the detective, announced loudly, his voice carrying over the sound of the construction crew. "I have a federal warrant for your arrest. You are being taken into custody on multiple counts of corporate wire fraud, embezzlement, and grand larceny. Turn around and put your hands behind your back." I watched from the quiet comfort of my vehicle as the police officers firmly pressed Donovan against the side of their cruiser. The metallic click of the handcuffs snapping shut over his wrists carried clearly across the ruined lawn. Catherine was screaming hysterically, begging the officers to let her son go, but they simply guided Donovan into the back of the police car and shut the door. I instructed my driver to follow the cruisers to the downtown federal precinct. I had absolutely no intention of missing the final act of his total collapse. When I arrived at this precinct, the lead detective was waiting for me near the front desk. Because my venture capital firm was the primary corporate victim of Donovan's multi-million-dollar embezzlement, I had been granted temporary clearance to speak with him before his official processing was completed. The detective led me down a series of sterile, brightly lit hallways that smelled strongly of industrial bleach and stale coffee. We stopped in front of a heavy steel door. The detective unlocked it, pushed it open, and stepped inside with me right behind him. The interrogation room was exactly as cold and unforgiving as one would expect. A single fluorescent bulb hummed loudly overhead, casting harsh shadows across the gray cinder-block walls. In the center of the room sat a heavy metal table bolted directly to the concrete floor. Donovan was sitting on a metal stool on the far side of the table. The arrogant, untouchable tech founder who had tried to buy my silence with a $10,000 check just days ago was completely gone. His custom-tailored suit jacket had been confiscated. His silk tie was missing. He sat slumped forward, staring blankly at his handcuffed wrists resting on the cold steel surface. He looked incredibly small, fragile, and utterly pathetic. He heard the heavy door click shut and slowly lifted his head. The moment his bloodshot eyes locked onto me, his entire demeanor drastically shifted. The hostility and rage he had displayed at the mansion vanished instantly. He realized that I was the only person left on the planet who held any real power, and his survival instincts kicked into high gear. He immediately reverted to the very same manipulative tactics he had used to deceive me for 7 years. "Peyton," he gasped, his voice cracking as genuine tears began to spill down his cheeks. "Thank God you came. Thank God you are here." I did not say a word. I pulled out the metal chair across from him, sat down gracefully, and folded my hands on the table. The detective stood quietly in the corner of the room, his arms crossed over his chest, watching the pathetic display. Donovan leaned forward as far as the handcuffs would allow, his face contorted into a mask of pure, desperate agony. "You have to help me, Peyton. You have to tell them to stop this. I know you are angry and you have every right to be, but you have proven your point. You took the company. You took the house. You won. Please just call your legal team and tell them to drop the federal charges. I cannot survive in prison." I looked at him with a profound emptiness. I felt absolutely nothing. No anger, no sorrow, no lingering affection. Just a clinical objective observation of a man who had completely destroyed his own life. Donovan saw my blank expression and immediately pivoted, deciding to play the emotional card. He let out a loud, wretched sob. "I am so sorry, Peyton," he cried, the tears flowing freely now. "I lost my way. The pressure of running that startup, the expectations from the investors, the constant demand from my mother to maintain our social status, it completely broke me. I was drowning in stress. I made terrible, unforgivable mistakes because I was weak. He tried to reach across the table to touch my hand, but the chain on his cuff stopped him short. Brianna meant absolutely nothing to me. He pleaded, his voice dripping with desperation. She was just a distraction from the crushing anxiety. I never loved her. I only ever loved you. Remember how we used to be. Remember our trips to the coast before the company took off. I can be that man again. I promise you, Peyton. I will go to therapy. I will do whatever it takes to earn back your trust. We can fix this together. I am your husband. You cannot just leave me here in this cage. I let his pathetic monologue echo against the cinderblock walls for a long moment. He truly believed he could talk his way out of a federal indictment by weaponizing the memory of our marriage. He thought I was still the supportive, forgiving woman who had spent years fixing his messes. You did not make mistakes because of stress, Donovan. I stated, my voice as sharp and cold as cracked glass. You made calculated, deliberate choices. You chose to set up fraudulent shell companies. You chose to siphon $2.5 million away from people who trusted you. You chose to buy your mistress a $50,000 diamond necklace using the money I helped you secure. You did not lose your way. You simply revealed exactly who you have always been. Donovan shook his head frantically, fresh tears tracking through the dirt on his face. Please, Peyton. I am begging you. I am your family. I am your husband. You have to call your lawyers and authorize my bail. You have to get me out of here. I maintained absolute eye contact as I reached into my designer handbag. I did not pull out a phone to call my legal team. I did not pull out a lifeline. I pulled out a crisp, heavy piece of legal paper with a bright blue state seal stamped at the top. I placed it onto the metal table and used 2 fingers to slide it smoothly across the surface until it rested directly in front of his handcuffed wrists. Donovan looked down at the document, his tears momentarily pausing in confusion. He squinted under the harsh fluorescent light, trying to read the legal jargon. When you called me into your office and handed me that $10,000 check, I explained calmly, you forced me to sign a no-fault zero-asset waiver. You were so blinded by your own greed, so desperate to protect what you thought was your wealth, that you failed to realize the legal implications of that specific document. Donovan stared at the paper, his breathing suddenly becoming very shallow. By forcing me to sign that waiver, I continued, my voice echoing with terrifying finality. You legally removed every single contestable issue from our divorce proceedings. There were no assets to divide. There was no alimony to debate. There was no property to fight over. Because you demanded a clean, immediate break, the family court judge rubber-stamped the paperwork without requiring a mandatory waiting period. I leaned back in my metal chair, a cold, victorious smile spreading across my face. That document you are looking at is a finalized divorce decree signed by a judge this morning, I announced. I do not owe you bail money. I do not owe you loyalty. I do not owe you a single ounce of protection. We aren't married, Donovan. You're on your own. With Donovan sitting in a federal holding cell, denied bail, and wearing a standard-issue orange jumpsuit, the reality of absolute poverty crashed down on Catherine and Isabella. Because my forensic audit proved that Donovan had funneled embezzled corporate funds directly into their personal bank accounts, federal investigators immediately froze every single financial asset they possessed. They were completely locked out of the banking system. They had no access to cash, no credit cards, and absolutely no wealthy friends willing to answer their desperate phone calls. They were forced to secure a cramped, roach-infested 2-bedroom apartment in one of the worst neighborhoods in the city. But to even afford the first month of rent and the basic security deposit they had to liquidate the only items the authorities had not yet seized, their personal wardrobes, Catherine and Isabella were forced to hold a public estate sale. Because they had no property of their own, they set up 2 cheap rusted folding tables and a flimsy metal clothing rack on the cracked concrete sidewalk directly in front of their new, depressing apartment complex. The contrast was incredibly pathetic. Thousands of dollars of imported silk dresses, designer leather handbags, and limited edition high heels were displayed on a sidewalk stained with old chewing gum and motor oil. The flickering neon sign of a cheap liquor store buzzed loudly across the street, illuminating the absolute ruins of their upper-class delusions. I did not miss the opportunity to witness this absolute poetry. I drove my sleek tinted black sedan to their street and parked smoothly across the intersection. I rolled my window down just a few inches, leaning back against the comfortable leather seat, with a fresh cup of coffee in my hand. I did not need to step out of the car. My mere presence, the gleaming reflection of my vehicle parked in their line of sight, was enough to let them know I was watching their public execution. The news of their massive financial and legal collapse had spread like wildfire through the elite country club circles. The high society women Catherine had spent decades attempting to dominate did not stay away. They showed up in a fleet of luxury sport utility vehicles parking along the dirty street. They stepped out wearing their expensive sunglasses, holding their designer purses tight against their bodies, as if the poverty might somehow be contagious. They did not come to support a fallen friend. They came to feast on a corpse. I watched as a woman in a sharp beige suit picked up Catherine's prized limited edition Italian leather handbag. Catherine had bragged about that specific bag for 6 months, claiming it proved she was at the absolute top of the social hierarchy. Catherine stood behind the folding table wearing her last clean designer blouse, attempting to maintain her haughty, arrogant posture despite standing next to an overflowing dumpster. "That bag is worth $4,000, Catherine stated, her voice tight and defensive. "I will not accept anything less than $800 in cash." The woman in the beige suit let out a loud, mocking laugh that echoed down the street. $800, the woman scoffed, turning the bag over carelessly. "Please, Catherine, everyone knows your son bought this with stolen money. You are lucky I am even willing to touch it. I will give you $20, and you should be grateful I am helping you pay for your bus fare." Catherine's face flushed a deep, humiliated shade of crimson. She opened her mouth to snap back, but the cruel reality of her situation stopped the words in her throat. She needed that $20 to buy groceries. With a shaking hand, Catherine accepted the crumpled bill, her dignity completely shattered in front of her former peers. Isabella stood on this other side of the folding table, trying to hide her face behind a pair of oversized sunglasses. She looked completely broken. She was watching the women she used to party with dig through her expensive shoes, throwing them back onto the table like cheap trash. Another socialite picked up a silk scarf, tossing a $5 bill at Isabella's chest. "Keep the change, Isabella," the socialite sneered. "You are going to need it to buy roach spray for your new palace." That single cruel comment was the absolute breaking point. The immense suffocating pressure of losing her husband, her wealth, and her social standing finally caused Isabella to completely snap. Isabella grabbed the $5 bill, crumpled it into a ball, and threw it directly into Catherine's face. "This is all your fault!" Isabella screamed at the top of her lungs, her voice completely hysterical. The high society women gasped, taking a synchronized step back, as the toxic mother and daughter bond violently detonated right on the sidewalk. Isabella ripped her sunglasses off, tears of pure rage streaming down her face. "You ruined my life," she shrieked, pointing a shaking finger directly at Catherine's chest. "You told me to drain Andre's bank accounts. You told me to demand more money to buy you these stupid bags. Andre was a good, honest man, and you convinced me he was not good enough for our family. Because of your insane, bottomless greed, I lost a husband who actually loved me. I lost my house. I have absolutely nothing left." Catherine gasped, looking around frantically at the wealthy women watching the spectacle. "Lower your voice immediately, Isabella," Catherine hissed, trying to grab her daughter's arm. "You are making a scene. We have to maintain our composure." "Composure!" Isabella roared violently, shoving her mother's hand away. "We are selling our shoes on a dirty sidewalk outside a bug-infested apartment while Donovan rots in a federal jail cell. There is no composure left. Your obsession with looking rich turned my brother into a criminal and turned me into a divorced, broke loser. I hate you." Catherine's face twisted with pure fury. She raised her hand and slapped Isabella hard across the cheek. The sharp cracking sound echoed down the concrete street. Isabella stood perfectly still for a second, touching her red cheek. Then, without saying another word, she turned around, kicked over the folding table full of designer clothes, and marched away down the sidewalk, leaving Catherine completely alone. Catherine dropped to her knees on the dirty concrete, desperately trying to gather the expensive blouses and shoes that had spilled into the street. The high society women did not help her. They simply turned around, got into their luxury vehicles, and drove away, gossiping excitedly about the ultimate collapse of the family. I took a slow, satisfying sip of my coffee. I rolled my window up, put my car into drive, and smoothly pulled away from the curb. The destruction of their personal empire was entirely complete. Now it was time to destroy the man who had caused it all in a court of law. The wheels of federal justice turn slowly, but they grind exceptionally fine. 8 months after I drove away from Catherine and Isabella on that dirty sidewalk, I walked through the heavy bronze doors of the federal courthouse downtown. Donovan was officially standing trial for multiple counts of wire fraud, embezzlement, and corporate malfeasance. I sat in the front row of the gallery, wearing a tailored charcoal suit, watching the man I once called my husband sweat profusely through his white collar. With his personal assets entirely frozen and his mother completely bankrupt, Donovan had been forced to rely on a sleazy, aggressive defense attorney who looked like he belonged on a late-night television commercial rather than in a federal courtroom. The defense attorney wasted absolutely no time attempting to control the narrative. During his opening statements and his brutal cross-examination of the prosecution's early witnesses, his desperate strategy became blatantly obvious. He wanted to paint me as the ultimate villain. He paced back and forth in front of the jury box, waving his hands and wildly gesturing in my direction. He spun a ridiculous, highly offensive fairy tale about a bitter, jealous wife who could not handle her husband's brilliant success. He claimed I was a ruthless corporate raider who manipulated obscure financial loopholes to steal Donovan's company out from under him. He went so far as to suggest that I had planted the digital financial evidence myself out of pure spite because I suspected him of infidelity. Donovan sat at the defense table, nodding along with a pathetic, victimized expression on his face. He genuinely hoped the jury would buy the sexist narrative of the scorned woman seeking illegal revenge. I did not react. I did not glare or shake my head. I simply watched the performance with a neutral expression, knowing his attorney was building a fragile house of cards that was about to be obliterated by an absolute hurricane. The prosecutor stood up, adjusted his tie, and called their star expert witness to the stand. The heavy wooden doors at the back of the courtroom opened, and Andre walked down the center aisle. My former brother-in-law looked absolutely immaculate. He wore a crisp, dark blue suit and carried himself with the quiet, unshakable dignity of a man who possessed the absolute truth. As an African-American senior auditor with an impeccable professional reputation, his mere presence in the courtroom commanded immediate respect from the jury. He took the oath, sat in the witness box, and folded his hands calmly in front of the microphone. The prosecutor asked Andre to explain his relationship to the defendant and his role in reviewing the corporate financials prior to the acquisition. Andre systematically and methodically dismantled Donovan's entire defense with cold, hard math. He did not use confusing corporate jargon or emotional appeals. He painted a crystal-clear picture for the jury. He explained exactly how he had uncovered the ghost accounts. He traced the missing $2.5 million step by step, showing how the money flowed directly from the startup investors into Donovan's private offshore accounts. Andre provided the exact timestamps, the internet protocol addresses, and the digital authorization signatures. He broke down the fake vendor invoices, proving beyond a shadow of a doubt that Donovan alone had initiated every single fraudulent transfer. He listed the exact amounts stolen to pay for the luxury penthouse and the exorbitant country club fees. He made the complex financial web simple, undeniable, and utterly devastating. The jury was completely captivated. Donovan's defense attorney was visibly sweating, wiping his forehead with a handkerchief as he realized his emotional manipulation strategy was being crushed by undeniable forensic evidence. The defense attorney knew he had to destroy Andre's credibility immediately, or the trial was effectively over. He practically sprinted to the podium for cross-examination. He leaned aggressively toward the witness box, adopting a mocking, highly condescending tone. He asked Andre about his current marital status. He loudly informed the jury that Andre was currently finalizing a highly contentious divorce with Donovan's sister Isabella. He accused Andre of harboring a deep personal vendetta against the entire family. He pointed directly at me, claiming Andre and I had secretly colluded to fabricate the audit because we were both bitter discarded spouses seeking petty revenge. He raised his voice, shouting so the jury would hear his righteous indignation. He asked Andre, "Is it not true that you only brought these so-called findings to light after your wife demanded a divorce, making this nothing more than a vindictive attempt to destroy her brother and ruin her family name?" Andre did not flinch. He did not raise his voice or take the aggressive bait. He looked at the defense attorney with profound clinical pity. Andre calmly reached into his inside breast pocket and withdrew a folded piece of heavy paper. He stated clearly for the courtroom record that he had never colluded with anyone, and that as a licensed senior auditor, he was legally bound by strict federal ethical guidelines. He unfolded the paper and held it up. It was a document bearing a heavy embossed government seal. Andre read the document header directly into the microphone. It was a certified time-stamped whistleblower report submitted directly to the Securities and Exchange Commission. Andre looked directly at the jury and delivered the ultimate checkmate. "I submitted this federal fraud report detailing Donovan's embezzlement exactly 3 weeks before my wife and I ever discussed a divorce." Andre stated, his voice ringing with absolute authority. "I filed this official government document a full month before I ever spoke to Peyton about the financial discrepancies. I did not report your client out of spite. I reported him because he is a thief." The defense attorney's jaw literally dropped. He stood frozen at the podium as his entire case instantly vaporized into thin air. Donovan buried his face in his hands, finally realizing that no amount of lies or manipulation could save him from the concrete reality of a federal prison sentence. The absolute destruction of Donovan's legal defense happened the exact second Andre held up that certified government document. The sleazy defense attorney physically deflated right in the middle of the federal courtroom. He had built his entire cross-examination on the sexist, tired narrative of a bitter wife and a vengeful brother-in-law conspiring to ruin a successful tech founder. But you cannot argue with a time-stamped whistleblower report submitted directly to the Securities and Exchange Commission a full month before any family conflict even occurred. The defense attorney slowly lowered his pointing finger, closed his mouth, and walked silently back to the defense table. He did not ask a single follow-up question. He knew it was over. Andre stepped down from the witness box with the same unshakable quiet dignity he had maintained the entire trial. He walked down the center aisle, gave me a brief, respectful nod, and pushed through the heavy bronze doors to wait outside. The closing arguments were essentially a formality. The federal prosecutor projected the financial ledgers, the shell company bank statements, and the high-definition security footage of Donovan and Brianna attempting to wipe the corporate servers onto the massive courtroom screen one last time. The prosecutor reminded the jury that white-collar crime was not a victimless offense. He pointed directly at Donovan and described a man driven by bottomless arrogance and unadulterated greed, a man who stole millions of dollars to fund a lifestyle he did not earn. When it was the defense attorney's turn to speak, he stumbled through a pathetic, disjointed plea for sympathy. He asked the jury to consider the immense pressure of running a tech startup. He tried to suggest that Donovan had simply gotten in over his head and made sloppy accounting errors. It was an insult to the intelligence of every single person sitting in that room. The jury members did not even look at him. They stared at Donovan with expressions of profound, icy disgust. The judge gave the final instructions and the jury was dismissed to deliberate. Federal financial fraud cases involving millions of dollars and mountains of digital evidence typically take days for a jury to sort through. I fully expected to go back to my hotel, order dinner, and wait for the long legal process to play out over the weekend. I was wrong. The jury deliberated for barely 2 hours. When the court clerk announced that a verdict had been reached so incredibly fast, a shockwave rippled through the gallery. In the legal world, a 2-hour deliberation in a complex fraud trial means only one thing. There was absolutely zero doubt in the minds of the jurors. The evidence was completely overwhelming. I took my seat in the front row as the courtroom rapidly filled back up. The heavy wooden doors were locked shut. The tension in the air was so thick it felt hard to breathe. Donovan stood at the defense table next to his defeated attorney. His face was slick with sweat, and his knees were physically trembling so badly he had to grip the edge of the wooden table just to remain upright. He looked like a man standing on the trapdoor of a gallows waiting for the lever to be pulled. The judge took the bench, a stern, unforgiving woman who had zero tolerance for corporate criminals. She asked the foreperson of the jury to stand and read the verdict. The foreperson, an older woman with a stern expression, unfolded a piece of paper. On the first count of federal wire fraud, she read clearly into the microphone, "We find the defendant guilty." Donovan let out a sharp, breathless gasp. On the second count of corporate embezzlement, the foreperson continued, her voice echoing off the high ceilings, "We find the defendant guilty." On the third count of grand larceny, guilty. On the fourth count of attempting to destroy corporate financial records, guilty. Count after count, the word guilty dropped like a heavy iron hammer. Donovan's legs finally gave out. He collapsed heavily into his wooden chair, burying his face in his trembling hands as loud, wretched sobs began to tear through his chest. His attorney did not even try to comfort him. The judge dismissed the jury, thanking them for their swift and decisive service. She then turned her piercing gaze directly onto Donovan. She did not delay the sentencing phase. She had seen enough arrogant tech founders try to cheat the system, and she was ready to make an absolute example out of him. Donovan, the judge, stated, her voice ringing with merciless authority, "You used your company as a personal piggy bank. You stole from investors who trusted your vision, and you attempted to destroy evidence when you were caught. Your actions demonstrate a complete and total lack of moral character. I am sentencing you to 84 months in a federal penitentiary." 7 years! Donovan wailed out loud, the reality of a federal prison cell finally crashing down on his sheltered, privileged existence. But I was not just waiting for the prison sentence. I was waiting for the financial ruling. That was the ultimate prize. Because this is a federal financial crime. The judge continued, looking down at her legal briefs. The court is mandating full and immediate financial restitution under the Mandatory Victims Restitution Act. You are ordered to repay the stolen $2.5 million, plus an additional $1 million in punitive damages and legal fees directly to the corporate entity that suffered the loss. The judge looked up and locked eyes with Donovan. Because a private venture capital firm legally acquired the entirety of your corporate debt and equity prior to your arrest, that specific firm is the sole legal beneficiary of this restitution order. I sat perfectly still in the front row, a slow, predatory smile spreading across my face. I owned that venture capital firm. The judge was ordering Donovan to pay me. Furthermore, the judge announced, delivering the absolute killing blow. The court recognizes that your personal assets have already been liquidated or seized. Therefore, this restitution order will be attached permanently to your person. Every single cent you earn from this day forward will be heavily garnished. That includes your federal prison labor wages. That includes any commissary deposits made by your family. And that includes any future income you ever generate once you are eventually released on parole. You will not own a fraction of your own labor until this debt is paid in full. Donovan slowly lifted his head from his hands. He turned around in his chair and looked directly at me sitting in the front row. The absolute suffocating horror washed over his face as the complete reality of the judge's ruling finally clicked in his brain. He did not just lose his company. He did not just lose his freedom. He had legally become an indentured servant to his own fraudulent debt. He was going to spend the next 7 years scrubbing cafeteria floors and doing manual laundry labor in a federal penitentiary, earning pennies an hour. And every single one of those pennies was going to be legally confiscated by the government and deposited directly into my corporate bank account. Even when he got out of prison, a convicted felon trying to find minimum wage work, a massive percentage of his paycheck would be automatically redirected to me for the rest of his natural life. He tried to throw me out on the street with a $10,000 check. Now he was going to spend the rest of his life clocking in for minimum wage to pay me back. I did not break eye contact with him as the federal marshals stepped forward, grabbed his arms, and hauled him up from the defense table. I watched them march him toward the side door leading to the holding cells. He was weeping, completely broken, a man who had finally been crushed by the immense weight of his own arrogance. I stood up, smoothed my tailored suit, and walked out of the courtroom. The ledger was officially balanced. The federal trial was officially behind me, but the real work was just beginning. Taking down Donovan was the explosive part of my strategy, but rebuilding the ruins of his corporate empire required a completely different kind of ruthlessness. On Monday morning, I walked through the glass doors of the corporate headquarters. The atmosphere in the lobby was thick with absolute terror. Donovan had run this tech startup like a toxic dictatorship, ruling through intimidation and stealing the credit for every single innovation his team produced. Now the employees had watched their chief executive officer get hauled off to federal prison, and they knew a faceless venture capital firm had executed a hostile takeover. They were sitting at their desks, packing their personal photographs and coffee mugs into cardboard boxes, fully expecting me to gut the staff and liquidate the remaining assets. I walked past the nervous receptionists and the terrified junior marketing analysts. I did not head to Donovan's old corner office. I had ordered the maintenance staff to completely dismantle that room over the weekend, tearing up the carpet and removing every single piece of expensive mahogany furniture he had purchased with stolen money. Instead, I stood in the center of the massive open-plan development floor. I instructed the Human Resources Director to call a mandatory company-wide town hall meeting in the main atrium. 30 minutes later, over 200 employees filed into the sunlit atrium. The silence was deafening. People were literally holding their breath, waiting for the corporate axe to fall. I did not stand behind a glass podium the way Donovan always did. I stood directly on the floor on their exact level. I looked around at the exhausted developers, the stressed customer service representatives, and the brilliant software engineers who had actually built the technology my firm acquired. "Good morning," I began, my voice carrying clearly across the quiet room. "I know exactly what you are all expecting today. You are expecting me to read off a massive list of layoffs. You are expecting me to announce that your departments are being outsourced, your salaries are being slashed, and this company is being broken apart and sold for scrap." I paused, letting the heavy reality of their fears hang in the air for a brief moment. A few people looked down at their shoes, bracing for the worst possible outcome. That is what a standard corporate raider would do. I continued, my tone shifting from stern to reassuring. "But I am not here to destroy this company. I am here to surgically remove the cancer that was killing it." I clicked a remote and projected a simple clear slide onto the massive digital display board behind me. It was not a chaotic spreadsheet of financial ruin. It was a brand new organizational chart. Over the past 72 hours, my transition team and I have reviewed every single line of your operational budget, I stated firmly. I saw exactly how Donovan secretly slashed your comprehensive health insurance plans last quarter. I saw how he quietly eliminated your performance bonuses, froze your annual raises, and canceled your retirement matching programs. He stood on this very floor and told you those cuts were necessary sacrifices to keep the startup afloat. I took a slow step forward, ensuring every person in the room was making eye contact with me. I am standing here today to tell you that was a complete and total lie. The crowd remained perfectly still, hanging on my every single word. "He stole your benefits to fund his personal luxury lifestyle," I announced, projecting my voice with absolute, unwavering authority. "So effective immediately, every single benefit that was stolen from you is fully restored. The premium health insurance plans are reinstated today. The frozen raises are being processed retroactively, meaning you will receive back pay for the months you were cheated. And most importantly, we are implementing an aggressive, transparent profit-sharing model. The people sitting in this room are the ones writing the code, securing the clients, and building the actual tangible value of this enterprise. From this day forward, when the company profits, you will profit directly." A collective gasp rippled through the massive atrium. A young software developer in the front row actually dropped his notebook onto the floor. The sheer, overwhelming relief washing over the crowd was a tangible physical force. They had walked into this room fully expecting to lose their livelihoods and their ability to feed their families. Instead, they were being handed the professional respect and financial compensation they had always deserved. I held up my hand to quiet the rising murmurs of shock and excitement. I am restructuring this entire corporation on a foundation of absolute transparency and unshakable ethical standards, I told them, making sure my conviction was felt in every corner of the room. We are never returning to the dark, secretive financial practices of the past. But to ensure that happens, I cannot oversee the ledgers alone. I need a financial partner who possesses an absolute, uncompromising moral compass. I need someone who literally uncovered the fraud that saved this company from total bankruptcy. I turned toward the heavy double doors at the very back of the atrium. I am incredibly proud to introduce your new Chief Financial Officer, I announced, my voice ringing with profound respect. The heavy doors swung open. Andre walked into the room. He wore a sharp, impeccably tailored suit carrying his leather briefcase with the calm, imposing dignity that defined his entire existence. The employees immediately recognized him from the explosive local and national news coverage of the federal trial. They knew this was the brilliant auditor who had risked his own prestigious career and his marriage to expose Donovan's massive embezzlement scheme. As Andre walked down the center aisle, the initial shock in the room rapidly transformed into pure, unadulterated electric energy. A senior engineer in the back started clapping. Then the marketing team joined in. Within seconds, the entire atrium erupted into thunderous, deafening applause. It was a massive, roaring wave of genuine gratitude and newfound hope. Andre reached the front of the room and extended his hand. I gripped it firmly, shaking the hand of the man who had been my most vital, loyal ally. We stood shoulder to shoulder, looking out at the cheering crowd. The toxic empire was officially dead, and our new dynasty had just begun. It is an undeniable law of corporate physics that every action has an equal and opposite reaction. While I was busy restructuring a multi-million-dollar technology firm and elevating Andre to his rightful position as Chief Financial Officer, the people who had tried to leave me with absolutely nothing were experiencing a severe structural collapse of their own. I did not need to actively ruin their lives anymore. Gravity and the federal justice system were doing all the heavy lifting. My private security team still provided me with routine weekly updates just to ensure none of them violated the strict legal boundaries we had set by contacting me or my newly stabilized staff. Reading those detailed reports became my absolute favorite Friday afternoon ritual. Let us start with Brianna, the ambitious 26-year-old executive assistant who truly believed she could sleep her way into a luxury penthouse apartment and a $50,000 diamond choker, was currently learning the harsh reality of federal restitution. Because she had signed the fraudulent banking documents and authorized the shell companies, she narrowly avoided a prison sentence by agreeing to a brutal plea deal. A major component of that deal included 1,000 hours of court-mandated community service. My security team sent me a high-resolution photograph to document her compliance. Brianna was standing on the gravel shoulder of a noisy, exhaust-filled interstate highway in the sweltering heat of the afternoon. She was wearing a baggy, heavily stained neon orange safety vest that clashed violently with her remaining heavy makeup. Instead of holding a crystal champagne flute at a luxury corporate gala, her manicured hands were blistered and gripping a cheap metal trash grabber. She spent her days picking up fast food wrappers, discarded soda cups, and cigarette butts as massive commercial freight trucks blew past her, covering her in road dust and grime. There were no wealthy venture capitalists out on the highway to manipulate. There was only garbage, which was exactly where she belonged. Isabella was facing a completely different kind of public execution. After Andre legally froze his assets, submitted his forensic evidence to the judge, and finalized their divorce, Isabella was left with absolutely zero marketable skills and a staggering mountain of personal credit card debt. Without her husband's steady, substantial income to siphon from, she was forced to take a minimum wage job as a barista at a high-end coffee boutique right in the center of the wealthy suburban district she used to rule. The universe has an incredibly ruthless sense of humor. The very same high society women she used to party with at the country club came into that coffee shop every single morning. I received detailed logs of Isabella being forced to wear a stiff green canvas apron with her name pinned to it, standing behind a sticky, hissing espresso machine. Her former friends did not show her a single ounce of pity. In fact, they went out of their way to treat her exactly the way Isabella had always treated service workers. They complained loudly that her milk foam was terrible. They demanded she remake their complicated drinks during the peak morning rush. Isabella had to bite her tongue, swallow her massive pride, and wipe down their tables with a damp rag while they openly gossiped about her family's complete financial ruin right in front of her face. She was completely trapped in a cage built from her own past arrogance. But the most poetic justice was entirely reserved for Catherine. At 60 years old, the woman who had spent her entire adult life obsessing over designer labels, sprawling estates, and country club status was completely unemployable in the corporate world. To afford the rent on her roach-infested, cramped two-bedroom apartment, she had to take the only job that would hire a disgraced bankrupt woman with zero professional references. Catherine was working the graveyard shift as a front desk receptionist at a dilapidated budget motel on the absolute worst side of the city. Her custom-beaded gowns and imported silk blouses were permanently replaced by an ill-fitting, scratchy polyester uniform shirt that smelled faintly of cheap cleaning supplies. She spent her nights sitting alone behind a thick pane of smudged bulletproof glass, terrified of the dark parking lot outside. She was forced to plaster a polite smile onto her face while checking in obnoxious, highly intoxicated guests who screamed at her over lost room keys and broken vending machines. The woman who once tried to dictate seating arrangements at VIP galas because my business suit ruined her aesthetic was now being yelled at by truck drivers for running out of cheap complimentary coffee at 3 in the morning. She had plummeted from the top of the social ladder straight into the concrete. It was during one of those miserable, lonely graveyard shifts that the ultimate reality of their toxic family dynamic finally shattered completely. At 2 o'clock in the morning, the cheap plastic telephone on Catherine's motel desk rang loudly, startling her awake. She picked up the heavy receiver and heard an automated federal operator announce a collect call originating from a federal penitentiary. It was Donovan. He had used his one allotted phone call for the week to reach his mother. Through the static and the background noise of the prison line, Donovan was sobbing hysterically. The harsh reality of his 84-month sentence had fully set in. He begged Catherine to send a few dollars to his prison commissary account because he was starving, terrified, and completely isolated in his cell. He cried out for his mother to save him, to tell him that everything was going to be all right. Catherine sat behind the bulletproof glass, staring blankly at the peeling, water-damaged wallpaper of the cheap motel lobby. She realized in that exact moment that her golden boy was no longer a source of immense wealth, power, or status. He was just a convicted felon begging for loose change, and his massive financial crimes were the direct reason she was wearing a polyester shirt on the graveyard shift. Catherine did not offer him a single word of comfort. She did not tell him she loved him. She did not promise to send him a dime. She simply reached forward and coldly placed the receiver back onto the cradle hanging up on her own son in the middle of his desperate sentence. Their familial love was only ever transactional, and Donovan's account was permanently overdrawn. 3 months had passed since the federal judge handed down Donovan's sentence. I was sitting behind my desk in the newly renovated chief executive office on the top floor of the corporate headquarters. I had ordered the maintenance crew to strip the room down to the concrete and glass. Gone was the heavy mahogany desk, the dark velvet curtains, and the pretentious, gaudy oil paintings Donovan had purchased with stolen money to make himself feel important. My new office was sleek, bright, and strictly functional. It was a space designed for a strategist, not an egomaniac. Sitting across from me was Andre, looking sharper and more at peace than I had ever seen him. We were reviewing the finalized financial reports for our very first quarter, operating under the new corporate structure. The numbers glowing on my computer screen were absolutely staggering. By eliminating Donovan's massive embezzlement drain and restoring the stolen benefits to the staff, we had fundamentally changed the entire culture of the building. The software engineers and developers finally working under a transparent profit-sharing model had delivered two major software updates ahead of schedule. Productivity had skyrocketed. For the first time in its history, the startup was not just surviving on venture capital loans. It was generating massive, sustainable, clean profit. Andre closed his encrypted tablet and leaned back in his chair, a rare, genuine smile crossing his face. "I have audited a lot of companies in my career, Peyton," he said, his deep voice carrying a tone of profound professional satisfaction. "I have seen turnarounds and I have seen bailouts, but I have never seen a financial recovery quite like this. We are officially operating in the black, and our projected growth for the next quarter is going to make the industry analysts lose their minds." I took a sip of my coffee, looking out the floor-to-ceiling windows at the sprawling city skyline below. It is amazing what people can build when they are not being actively robbed and manipulated by their own leadership, I replied. The room fell into a comfortable, quiet silence. It was the deep, resonant peace that only comes after surviving a massive war. We had spent months operating on pure adrenaline, navigating federal investigations, hostile debt acquisitions, and vicious family confrontations. Now, with the villains completely neutralized and serving their respective punishments, we finally had a moment to breathe and look at the scars they had left behind. Andre looked down at his left hand. The gold wedding band he used to wear was permanently gone. His divorce from Isabella had been finalized a few weeks ago. Because he had frozen his assets and submitted the forensic evidence of her financial theft directly to the judge, she had walked away with absolutely nothing. "I never thought my life would end up here," Andre said softly, looking back up at me. "I spent years trying to be the perfect husband, trying to earn the respect of a family that only ever saw me as a walking paycheck. Isabella and Catherine treated me like a subordinate because I actually worked for a living instead of coasting on a fake high society reputation. When I found out what Donovan was doing, I thought my entire world was going to collapse. I thought I was going to be dragged down into federal prison right alongside them." Andre leaned forward, resting his forearms on the glass desk. He looked at me with an expression of immense, unshakable gratitude. "You showed me a different way out, Peyton. You showed me how to fight back legally, smartly, and absolutely ruthlessly. You taught me that I did not have to compromise my integrity to survive their toxicity. You gave me my life back, and I will never be able to repay you for that." I shook my head, rejecting his humility. I looked at the brilliant, highly ethical man sitting across from me. "You have it completely backward, Andre," I told him with absolute sincerity. "I had the venture capital leverage and I had the strategic mindset. But none of this, not the debt acquisition, not the boardroom takeover, and certainly not the federal fraud conviction would have been possible without you." I pointed to the financial reports resting on his tablet. "You were the one who refused to sign those fraudulent tax documents. You were the one who risked your own career and your marriage to secure the raw, unedited ledgers. Your moral compass was the linchpin of this entire operation. If you had caved to Isabella's threats, if you had stamped those fake books to protect the family, Donovan would have merged with my firm, hidden his crimes in the fine print, and destroyed us both. I would have been legally ruined. Without your integrity, Andre, I would have been completely destroyed. We saved each other." Andre nodded slowly, a profound mutual respect passing between us. We were not connected by blood, and we were no longer connected by marriage to that horrific family. We were connected by something much stronger. We were bound by shared ethics, mutual survival, and the absolute refusal to be victimized by greedy, arrogant people. We were just about to discuss the hiring budget for the next quarter when the sleek, modern intercom on my desk chimed brightly. I pressed a button and the voice of my new executive assistant, Monica, filled the quiet office. "Excuse me, Peyton," Monica announced professionally. "The press pool has finished setting up in the main briefing room downstairs. We have reporters here from the major financial networks and several national technology publications. They are all set up and waiting for your scheduled press conference regarding the company's quarterly turnaround." "Thank you, Monica," I replied. "Tell security to open the doors to the main floor. I will be down in exactly 2 minutes." I released the intercom button and stood up from my chair. I walked over to the tall mirror resting in the corner of the office. I was wearing a sharply tailored midnight blue blazer over a crisp white shirt. My posture was straight, my expression was composed, and my eyes were completely clear. I was no longer the unseen, unappreciated architect hiding in the shadows of an arrogant man. I was the majority shareholder, I was the chief executive officer, and I was about to step directly into the brightest spotlight in the corporate world. I buttoned my blazer, turned to my chief financial officer, and smiled. "Shall we go tell the world exactly who runs this empire now?" Andre stood up, picking up his leather briefcase with a confident, powerful stride. "Lead the way." I stepped up to the acrylic podium, adjusting the microphones as a blinding sea of camera flashes erupted across the press room. I was no longer the unseen strategist, hiding in the shadows of a narcissistic man. I was the chief executive officer of a company that had just posted record-breaking profits after surviving one of the most explosive federal fraud scandals in recent corporate history. The room was packed with financial journalists, technology reporters, and industry analysts, all desperate to hear the definitive narrative of this remarkable turnaround. I looked out over the crowd, spotting Andre standing near the back doors, a quiet, reassuring anchor in the chaos. A reporter from a major financial network raised her hand, her voice cutting through the noise. "Peyton," she called out, "your personal and professional life intersected in an incredibly public, damaging way. You survived a hostile divorce, a devastating corporate embezzlement scandal, and absolute social betrayal. How did you not just survive that level of destruction, but actually manage to build an industry titan out of the ashes?" The room went completely silent, waiting for my response. They expected me to bash Donovan. They wanted me to drag Catherine through the mud and give them sensational headlines about revenge and bitterness. I did not give them the satisfaction of a petty feud. I leaned forward, gripping the edges of the podium, and spoke with absolute, unshakable conviction. "I survived because I was constantly underestimated," I told them, my voice echoing clearly through the speaker system. For 7 years, I was told by the people closest to me that my role was to be quiet, to be supportive, to be nothing more than an accessory to someone else's supposed genius. I was treated like a disposable asset by individuals who believed that their unearned status made them untouchable. I looked directly into the camera lenses in the center aisle. But being treated like garbage does not break you if you understand your own structural integrity. It is actually the ultimate catalyst. Every time they diminished my contributions, they handed me another piece of leverage. Every time they assumed I was ignorant, they allowed me to study their weaknesses in perfect silence. The pressure they applied to destroy me did not crush me, it forged me into absolute steel. I did not pause for applause. I kept my pacing deliberate and rhythmic. "You do not build an industry titan by destroying other people out of spite." I continued, my gaze sweeping across the silent journalists. "You build it by fiercely protecting the people who actually generate value. We survived this scandal because we chose transparency over ego. We succeeded because we decided to reward the engineers, the developers, and the brilliant minds on our floor, rather than funneling profits into the pockets of arrogant leadership. This company is a titan today because it is finally built on a foundation of reality, not the fragile delusions of a man who thought he could steal his way to the top." The reporters began frantically typing notes. The sheer power of the narrative was undeniable. I had taken the worst moment of my life and weaponized it into a masterclass on ethical corporate leadership. "We are not just surviving," I concluded, my tone ringing with absolute finality. "We are setting the new standard. And to anyone who thinks they can build an empire on fraud and manipulation, I suggest you look very closely at the consequences. The era of the untouchable ego is over. Thank you." I stepped away from the podium as the room erupted into a deafening roar of applause and shouted questions. I did not stop to answer them. I had delivered my message, and the numbers would speak for the rest. I walked off the stage, meeting Andre in the secure hallway behind the press room. He gave me a respectful nod, and we took the private elevator back up to the executive suite. I walked into my high-rise office, the afternoon sun streaming through the massive floor-to-ceiling windows. The view of the city skyline was breathtaking, stretching out for miles in every direction. I stood by the glass looking down at the tiny moving cars and the bustling streets below. I thought about Catherine likely waking up for another miserable graveyard shift at that cheap motel. I thought about Isabella wiping down sticky coffee tables while her former friends mocked her. And I thought about Donovan sitting in a federal prison cell, knowing that every single cent he earned for the rest of his miserable life belonged to me. They had tried to throw me out on the street with a $10,000 check and a garbage bag full of my clothes. They thought they were the apex predators of their tiny, delusional world. I took a slow, deep breath, feeling the profound, unshakable peace settling into my bones. I was wealthy. I was respected, and I was surrounded by true loyal allies like Andre. The ultimate payoff was not just taking everything they had. The absolute sweetest revenge was becoming a titan they could never ever touch again. I turned away from the window, walked over to my desk, and opened my laptop. There was still an empire to run. The greatest lesson I learned from dismantling Donovan's fraudulent empire is that your true value is forged in the fires of being underestimated. When toxic people treat you like a disposable stepping stone, they hand you the very leverage needed to dismantle their illusions. I survived absolute betrayal not by seeking emotional closure from narcissists, but by recognizing my own structural integrity and utilizing cold hard facts. You never have to compromise your ethics to defeat those who lack them. You simply let their arrogance build the trap. Success is the ultimate equalizer. Share your own stories of triumph below.